Good morning. Today is Tuesday, November 19th, 2019. This is a special meeting of the Los Angeles Board of Police Commissioners. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Good morning. Let the record reflect Commissioners Decker, Goldsmith, and Soboroff are present, and we have a quorum.
Thank you. Good morning to everyone. Just over a year ago now, I was given the great privilege of serving on this commission. During this time, I've heard from the men and women in this department about the importance of community policing to them, and have met with and heard from many individuals, residents, and community groups who work diligently in all corners of this city to make it a better place for all of us to live. And I've heard their voices about their views on community policing as well. I greatly appreciate the insights of all Angelenos that have shared with me what they expect and need from their police department. And certainly it has been a great privilege to meet with so many people who truly care about this city that we live in. 2 months ago, when I became president of the commission, I said we would get an update on the progress of the department, what the department has done with respect to adopting and incorporating the recommendations of the Department of Justice's 21st Century Policing Report, a report that also focuses on many aspects of community policing. This commission previously made a decision that implementing the report's recommendations will help make this a more transparent and trusted police department. We reviewed the updated progress of this department about a month ago with the great assistance of the Inspector General. And indeed, it indicated that the department has continued to make great progress in adopting the recommendations detailed in that report, including on community policing. While the report to the Commission indicates the department constantly strives to embody the concepts of community policing, this effort to embrace and enhance community policing is a never-ending effort. We should always seek to get better. Part of the work of this commission must be to bring more community groups to the table. And in my first meeting as president of the commission, I stated I was working with Commissioner Goldsmith and the other commissioners in organizing this single-purpose meeting to discuss community policing with a variety of community-based organizations in the city. Today is that meeting. However, today's meeting is not the only meeting we can or should hold on this issue, nor will they all be held here in the Civic Center. I stated that previously as well. Today's meeting reflects a renewed effort by this commission to hear from and listen to, and importantly, listen to different members of the community. But by no means will all members of the community be present here today. We certainly need to hear from more, a lot more, and that is my plan. I know that all the commissioners want that as well, and we will do that in the future. Community policing is the cornerstone of effective policing, and that is what the residents of Los Angeles expect from this department. We can never forget that it is the community we serve. We need to hear from them to gauge how they perceive the department and how the department and this commission can better serve their interests. Today is an opportunity to do that, to listen, and that is how the day will proceed. We will hear from a variety of panels representing a variety of groups and organizations. We are fortunate here in Los Angeles to have many different groups with differing opinions about their police department. Today, a small number of those groups we will hear from. I'd like to thank Commissioner Goldsmith, Mr. Teefank, and the Commission staff for their help in putting together today's presentations. Thank the department for their efforts, but most especially thank all the groups attending and presenting today. Thank the members of the public for attending and joining this discussion as well. We look forward to hearing from you. Commissioner Goldsmith, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Decker. I'd also like to extend my thanks to you, Commissioner Decker, for all the hard work you put into this, to Mr. Teefank and the Commission staff and the department for putting together a really jam-packed and robust series of experts on this subject, and also want to thank all of our speakers who are here today who have put a lot of time and energy into their remarks today. I'm particularly eager to really learn more deeply and understand what's working and what isn't about the department's community policing efforts, what's working and what can be improved. And community policing really is meant to promote public safety, to reduce crime and fear of crime, and to build trust in communities. And so I'd like to explore how we can, what we can learn from the more formal and structured community policing efforts at the LAPD and how those types of practices, where they're effective, can be institutionalized and integrated throughout the department, really in everyday policing. And in particular, I'm interested in non-enforcement alternatives to the sort of traditional enforcement strategies, both non-enforcement strategies led by the department, but also community-based strategies that may be...
You reject this sham public hearing on community policing. Which community did you reach out to, Shane?
Mr. Smith, you're out of order, sir. Mr. Smith, sir, you're disrupting the meeting. Mr. Smith, if you do not stop disrupting this meeting, sir, Mr. Smith, you're going to be excused, sir. Mr. Smith, I'd ask you to sit down, sir. Mr. Smith, this is your last warning. Mr. Smith, very well, Mr. Smith, you need to be excused from today's meeting. Mr. Smith is hereby excused from the meeting.
How is this a public hearing on community policing? Where's the public?
Sir, you're excused from today's meeting.
Can I
Mr. Smith?
Can I respond?
Mr. Smith,
and just finish?
please. Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith.
Murdering black people in
Mr.
South
Smith.
Central. Josh Rubenstein's out to everybody.
Mr. Smith, you're
Press
excused
requests.
from
Everybody
today's
knows
meeting.
about the suspect that
Thank
was
you,
killed.
sir.
No one knows why the police are there in the first place.
Mr. Smith,
I'd like
if
to
you wanted
respond to these
have
comments directly.
Commissioner Goldsmith.
Mr.
Mr. Smith, sir.
I hear you,
Sir,
and I would
there's
like
an-
to respond to what you're saying if you would
Sir,
pause.
there's an opportunity for you to speak. Sir, there's an opportunity for you to speak. You've chosen not to use it. I'm very sorry, Mr. Smith, but you're excused from the meeting. Officers, please.
And I do appreciate the...
Policing is just work.
Sir,
It's occupation of black and brown
thank you,
people
Mr.
in
Smith.
neighborhoods.
I'm terribly sorry you chose to disrupt the meeting. I would genuinely like to hear what you have to say at the appropriate time, though. Thank you, Mr. Smith. I actually do, sir. Please, Mr. Smith, if you wanted to, please, all members of the public. Ms. Viola, please don't speak out. There's an opportunity for you to speak. Mr. Smith,
Where people that are actually impacted by policing can come.
Mr. Smith, are you going to voluntarily leave the meeting, sir? Sir? Sir, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Smith. I'd remind all members of the public. I understand you feel very, very passionate. I understand you feel very passionate about this, and I respect that. I'd ask for you to respect the order of this meeting and to speak at the designated time. Ms. Commissioner, if you'd like
Thank
to
you, yeah.
continue.
I just want to acknowledge what I could hear from what was just being said and understand that it's shared by a number of people who held up signs, and just say that I agree that I would like to suggest that the commission go out and into communities and to hear directly from community members. I would like us to schedule one or more meetings that allow us to hear directly from community members who have had positive experiences and who have had negative experiences. In particular, make sure that we're going into communities where trust with the police is low, and because those people and those communities don't trust the police or the police commission, I think that it would be best if we partner with community-based organizations and other government agencies that have a track record and have trust in communities and can turn those communities out so that we can hear from voices, in addition to the experts we're going to hear from today. We obviously can't reschedule because they're here and they've put a lot of time and effort into this, but I do think it is unfortunate that there are not more community members here, and I think that there won't be more of a dialogue. And I think yeah, I agree. So I think obviously there was not outreach done, enough outreach done to get folks in the room, and we need to do the meetings in places and at times and days that are going to be convenient to community members. And so I would like to make sure that we do that. I know Commissioner Decker has committed to that.
Ms. Viola, please don't speak out. Again, there'll be an opportunity for you to express your views, ma'am.
So in particular, I want to hear from people who have had positive experiences about what's working, so we can do more of that. And as I said, also from people who have had negative experiences. And in particular, I would like to hear from community organizations that are focused on dismantling, racism inside public institutions and addressing and fighting for a vision of racial equity. I think that perspective is also particularly important as we address these issues.
Sir, sir, please have a seat, sir. There'll be an opportunity for you to speak out later. Sir, please have a seat, sir. Sir, I'm asking you to kindly stop disrupting the meeting and please have a seat. Thank you very much, sir. Ms. Goldsmith, have you concluded your remarks?
Thank you. Yes, I've concluded my remarks.
Chief?
Good morning, Commissioners. In a few moments, this board will hear from Assistant Chief Arcos and other department members regarding critical components of our community policing initiatives. The programs identified are by no means exhaustive of our work, and in discussions with Executive Director Richard Tiefenk, however, they were chosen in an interest of time to balance the array of other speakers and topics that's going to be discussed. As Chief of Police, though, I'm going to take a few moments to frame some remarks regarding the meaning of community policing in our organizational philosophy, our makeup, and our day-to-day operations of LAPD. Community policing in the LAPD began more than 4 decades ago, including the establishment of our Senior Lead program, evolving over time with the development of our Community Police Advisory Boards, and the latest creations of our community safety partnerships and the use of pre-arrest diversion for young people, all of which you'll hear more of today. And community policing in LAPD, as Commissioner President indicated, is a living philosophy that continues to evolve to meet the needs of all of our communities. Most recently, that evolution has focused more intensely on the critical importance of relationships in building communities relationships in communities that have historically distrusted the police.
You need to have community policing in the community.
Thank you, sir.
Community could be here.
Sir, please have a seat.
What you say.
Sir,
Why do you have
sir, can you please have a seat, sir, so you're not disrupting the meeting? Sir, can you please have a seat?
my interpretation of LAPD?
Sir, I'm asking you to have a seat and stop disrupting the meeting so we can hear from you at the appropriate time. Sir, regrettably, if you don't sit down, we're going to have to ask you to leave the meeting, sir. Please, sir, please have a seat. Sir, I'm asking you to have a seat so we can continue with this meeting. Sir, your final warning. Thank you very much, sir. Chief, could you conclude your, continue with your remarks? Excuse me, Mr. Akili. Mr. Akili. Sir, you need to please stop interrupting the call. Sir, please stop interrupting the meeting. Ms. Viola, I previously warned you to stop interrupting the meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, please stop interrupting the meeting. If you will not stop disrupting the meeting, I'll have to clear the room, and I do not want to do that. Mr. Akili, please stop interrupting the meeting. Ms. Viola, you're now excused from the meeting. I've given you several warnings, ma'am, about interrupting this meeting. Mr. Akili, please stop disrupting the meeting, or you too will have to be excused. Ms. Viola, you're excused. Officers, Ms. Viola has previously disrupted the meeting, and so now she needs to be excused. Mr. Akili, your final warning, sir.
My final warning is that I will
Thank you, sir.
until you do this in the community.
Thank you, sir. Please, sir, regrettably, sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the meeting. I'd prefer not to do that. Very well. Sir, we're going to excuse you from the meeting. If you decline, sir, Mr. Akili, sir, at the beginning of this meeting, I said we were going to have more meetings, sir, but we are proceeding today. Mr. Akili's excused from the meeting. We'll take a brief recess until Mr. Akili decides he'll leave, and then we will return and proceed with this meeting. Thank you very much. Good morning. We are back in session. Members of the public, I would ask, excuse me. Excuse me, sir, please have a seat. If there continue to be disruptions, we'll clear the room. Sir, if you don't sit down,
That's what it is?
okay.
That's community policing?
Mr. Tiefenk, Chief, we'll have to clear the room of spectators with the exception of all presenters today. And we'll go back into recess and then we'll continue our meeting. Thank you very much. Good morning. We will now proceed with the special meeting of the Los Angeles Board of Police Commissioners. I apologize to all in attendance for that delay. We are, as I said earlier, this commission is here because we want to listen to all the voices. We very much want to hear from everyone. We intend this to be the first of many meetings on community policing, engaging the community. We want to hear from all groups. I will note also that some of the individuals and groups that were represented here earlier were invited to speak on a panel where we would give them a lot of time, just like all of the other panels. Some of them initially agreed, and then they decided to withdraw that, their acceptance of that invitation. Nevertheless, we hope to engage all of them in the future. Every voice in this city is incredibly important to be heard, particularly the voices who feel this department is not living up to expectations, because we always strive to get better. With that, Chief, I understand your remarks were interrupted. You can feel free from the beginning, or you can pick it up however you wish, sir.
Well, in respect to our audience and the panelists, which I really am looking forward to hearing, let me just finish my remarks rather than restart them. And just, as a guiding philosophy, community policing's aim is to build and deepen the trust and confidence of all of our communities in everything that we say and do. To promote the concept of public safety being a shared responsibility, ever dependent on effective collaborative partnerships and problem solving. Policing in Los Angeles today also recognizes the critical importance of data-informed strategies that prevent crime rather than being reactive. Strategies that build positive relationships and accountability between neighborhoods and individual officers, including understanding the impact of our efforts by seeking ongoing input from all of our communities. Ensuring a workforce that's culturally sensitive, reflective of our diverse communities, well-trained, and feel that they each have a voice within the department, empowered by pushing authority and responsibilities to the lowest levels of the organization to improve performance. With my appointment as chief, I was committed to policing with purpose, partnerships, and compassion to ensure transparency, accessibility, and responsiveness. Building on the progress of this organization over the last nearly 2 decades, frequently recognized by many, including then President Obama's 21st Century Policing Report, as well as a broad array of community stakeholders today. This department has made tremendous progress in how it goes about community policing, yet we recognize there's much work yet to be done. What we'll hear today is about community policing in Los Angeles, involving programs designed to promote positive interaction between our people and communities, to enhance public trust and public safety with transparency and accountability, to lower crime and improve public safety by collaborative partnerships and problem solving, recognizing public safety as a shared responsibility. Been looking forward to today's meeting, as well as listening to the broader range of panelists assembled by this commission and the community members. And Commissioner President, I join with you, saddened that the voices today could not be heard from community members who felt that this engagement somehow did not serve the needs of the community. I was disappointed to hear particularly of 2 organizations that had been allotted time, and I look forward to hearing from their prepared remarks and their decision not to. I look forward to the opportunity of supporting this commission in any fashion or form as to public meetings that are meaningful, that are engaging, and that gives this department, this commission, as well as myself and our members of this organization, an opportunity to listen and to hear how things work well. I know we'll hear a number of those opportunities today, but also areas that we need to improve on. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Chief. We will continue to engage all members of the community. Today's schedule, we have planned first to hear from the department, then we will hear about national best practices, then we will hear a panel on gang reduction and youth development. We'll hear more from different community groups, and of course, the particular issues that women are faced with respect to community policing. We look forward to hearing from all the panels and members of the public. So first, if I could ask the members of the department to come forward so that you can lay the foundation of where the department is at and the direction you anticipate taking. Chief Arcos.
Good morning, Commissioner. Can you hear me? Okay. Power is on. The sound system is really, really low here. Can you hear? Test. Is that any better? A little louder? Okay. All right. Good morning, Chief and Commissioners. Again, thank you for the opportunity to be present here today.
If you could hold that closer and let's see if that works.
Good morning. No. Maybe I'll go to use that one. We can try that. How about this one? How about this one here?
Testing. All right.
Testing. Okay. All right. Good morning, Commissioners.
And if,
Again, thank you for the
Chief,
opportunity.
if I could, excuse me, if the team could try to see if they could get the microphone on the table working for future panels, I'd appreciate it.
Okay. Okay. Ready? Okay. Good. Okay. Good. Thanks again for the opportunity to present on our department's efforts in support of community policing. I'm Assistant Chief Robert Arcos, the Director of the Office of Operations, joined by Commander Gerald Woodyard, the Commanding Officer of Community Engagement Group, responsible for the oversight of all community policing programs throughout the city of Los Angeles. Again, I wanted to thank the Commission for the single-purpose meeting today, and also the collection of panelists that you have joined here today with us, some very true partners that are making a difference in our communities throughout the city. In my remarks today, I'm going to address 3 areas that I believe encompass our department's community policing framework. Number 1, the organizational transformation. 2, problem solving. And 3, our strategic ongoing efforts for community policing. The department's organizational transformation to incorporate community policing. The Los Angeles Police Department began its transformation to a community-centered model of policing in the 1970s when Chief Ed Davis promoted neighborhood watch groups and community engagement. The effort was renewed in 1991 when the Christopher Commission recommended the department adopt a community policing model of management. The arrival of Chief Willie Williams in 1992 ushered in the area of widespread implementation. Under current leadership, community policing concepts are instilled from the first day of the police academy through every assignment and position that an officer holds. Specific management policies, organizational structure, personnel practices, accountability, and transparency measures all highlight these efforts. In summary, community policing is a philosophy guided by the critical importance of recognizing the importance of relationships. Every contact, every opportunity matters in building trust and legitimacy in our communities. The organizational transformation is addressing community concerns through management policies and feedback. As part of the incorporation of the community into our practices and procedures, the department maintains one of the nation's broadest complaint policies, accepting community complaints from anyone at any time for any reason, including third-party and anonymous complaints. Although some of the complaints are facially apparent to be a deviation of policy or training, the department understands an even larger number arise from misperceptions about encounters between the public and officers. Thus, in conjunction with the Office of the City Attorney, the department offers alternative dispute resolution and mediation as ways to resolve complaints. Voluntary for officers and community members, these programs offer a chance for the officer and complainant to review the circumstances spawning the grievance and engage in productive dialogue to understand each other's point of view. Research has shown that this not only strengthens bonds and trust between the department and community, but also might assist the officer in changing conduct that may be perceived in the future. Soliciting community feedback. The department also employs community surveys and opportunities to create feedback loops with those we serve. As one part of the effort, the department uses information from community surveys, such as those done by Elucid, to gauge feedback from the community on a variety of metrics. These include not only general satisfaction with the department and feelings of safety, but also areas of highest concern, such as traffic or homelessness. The department is also mindful that it is important to include all its communities for this feedback and work with its research providers to ensure disenfranchised voices are included in the overall assessment. Currently, the department is also working to secure a local research university as a partner for obtaining community feedback. Personnel practices. To reflect the depth of the department's commitment to community policing, all oral interviews for promotion and pay grade advancement contain questions relating to actual instances of community policing the officer has engaged in, as well as how the applicant would approach it in future scenarios. By linking promotion and advancement opportunities to community policing, the department positions itself to permanently instilling this focus in organizational culture. The role of the Senior Lead Officer, or SLO. As the department began its evolution to become community policing focused, a position of a Senior Lead Officer was introduced in the 1970s. A SLO is assigned to a basic car area, itself a subset of geographic area designed around individual neighborhoods, and the coordinator and point of contact for community policing efforts. While unique to the department at this time, many other agencies, including the New York Police Department, have implemented similar positions because of the success we have had in establishing long-lasting ties to the community and a single personable individual to seek resolutions to community issues. The basic car is designed on the department's management principle of territorial imperative, which in part states, police work is one of the most personal of all personal services. The police officers and the people they serve must be as close as possible, and where possible, must know one another. Such closeness can generate the police-citizen cooperation necessary for the involvement of the whole community in community protection. Today, the department is comprised of 168 basic cars. The role of a Senior Lead Officer is to lead the functional operations of the basic car and the community it serves. SLOs serve as an integral link and conduit to liaise with the department, city government, internal and external stakeholders to responsibly serve the community. Senior Lead Officers monitor, assess, and respond to quality of life issues, crime trends, and supporting a variety of community and youth programs. The SLOs organize their comprehensive community engagement approach with a problem-solving model known as SARA to address identified concerns. The SARA projects are documented and reviewed by the Area Commanding Officer to ensure the department is providing quality service, protection, enforcement, and prevention in partnership with clients and communities. In many instances, the Senior Lead Officer is the most visible point of contact in our communities. Community Police Advisory Boards, or CPAB. CPABs were established in 1993, shortly after the Los Angeles riots, to build meaningful dialogue and representation with the communities we serve. A CPAB is comprised of civilian volunteers from the local community, tasked with advising the Area Commanding Officer on quality of life issues and crime. CPABs constitute one of the most vital communication channels between the members of the community and the local area command. Today, each area has a CPAB that meets monthly with the commanding officer. Meetings are designed to be informative, interactive, and problem-solving oriented. Additionally, each area co-chair meets quarterly with the Bureau Commanding Officer to identify best practices and/or areas of improvement. Late last year, the Office of Operations hosted a CPAB summit for all co-chairs to revitalize and focus on our efforts consistent with Chief Moore's expectations. Information technology systems leading to accountability and transparency. The department has also adopted information technology solutions to ensure accountability and transparency. A digital in-car video system in use for a decade has provided an independent recordation of many police encounters. Building upon this success, all patrol officers have been equipped with body-worn video since 2017. Not only has this footage substantiated or disproved allegations of misconduct, the department also releases footage of all critical incidents to members of the public. This video release, in conjunction with a summary of the decision-making process for the adjudication of these events, heightens the community role in fostering accountability and transparency. Now move to problem solving. The department approaches policing through a holistic problem-solving method. Community concerns such as radio calls and reports of crime or nuisances are addressed by a collaborative approach to solve problems and improve the quality of life for community members, especially the most vulnerable. Every 911 call represents a problem held by a community member and an opportunity for our officers to provide a resolution. In addition to patrol officers being equipped with conflict resolution skills, these first-line efforts are met with strong city partnerships with the Department of Transportation, the City Attorney's Office, Bureau of Street Services, and the Los Angeles Housing Authority. As to specific systemic issues the department is addressing, I'll start with homelessness. As one of the greatest humanitarian crises of our time, homelessness in the city impacts everyone. In addition to providing support to the Los Angeles Housing Authority in a service-led solution, the department has formed internal initiatives such as the Homeless Outreach Proactive Engagement Teams, or HOPE, and Resources Enhancement Services Enforcement Team, RESET, to address specific problems endemic to the homeless community. Persons experiencing homelessness may be more likely to be victims of other crimes. Thus, the LAPD also affirms its belief in fair and balanced application of the law. A person in a state of homelessness is entitled to the same high level of law enforcement service as any other person in our community. The LAPD works just as hard to prevent crimes among our homeless population and will relentlessly pursue justice for victims of crime. Human trafficking. The department has evolved its understanding of commercial sex trade, particularly as it relates to underage and other vulnerable victims. Historically, these victims were considered suspects in the prostitution transaction. It is now understood that these individuals are coerced or duped into participation. As such, the department now seeks to target enforcement onto those who force others into victimhood. While rescuing and providing resources to the often marginalized individuals forced into the industry, this issue is critically important to the department, as evidenced by all 4 bureaus maintaining dedicated personnel for human trafficking task forces. Gang crime. It is important to the department's mission to reduce the fear and incidents of crime for our community, regardless of age level. As such, efforts to restore neighborhood parks as areas of safety and recreation for youth in the city are in full effect. Working with the mayor's office, gang reduction and youth development, Recreation and Parks Department, and various community-based organizations, the department co-sponsors Summer Night Lights, a program to provide an enhanced, engaging presence at neighborhood parks in historically high crime areas. By providing a safe space for youth and with positive role models, the department not only deters crime, but seeks to inspire a new generation to avoid becoming involved in gangs, especially when joining is done out of a need for seeking protection. The department's strategic ongoing efforts for community policing. The department's commitment to community policing through the adoption of best practices. As you're aware, the Presidential Task Force on 21st Century Policing, established in 2015 by presidential executive order, released a report seeking to identify the best means to provide an effective partnership between law enforcement and local communities to reduce crime and increase trust. The task force identified 6 pillars and 43 strategies to guide local law enforcement. Notably, at the time of the report, over half of the recommended strategies were codified in existing LAPD policies and procedures. The other strategies were included in our 5-year strategic plan, and today every one of the 43 strategies have been implemented and folded into ongoing training, technology, development, and reflected in our community policing strategies. Our efforts to increase accessibility to community members. The department understands that community policing also means meeting the evolving needs of our community members. This includes becoming accessible to more of the community and providing additional convenience to those we serve. Community members have come to expect the ability to do everything from banking to video streaming from their computer or smartphone, and we are striving to provide access to our police services from these same platforms. The department has launched the Community Online Reporting System, CORS, to allow for community members to report an increasing number of police reports online. Additionally, the department is engaging with community through various social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Nextdoor, Neighbors, to provide accessibility through the community's preferred method of interaction. This effort also continues into holding open houses at area stations, conducting roll call on the streets to allow public involvement and participation in National Night Out. Training provided to officers that is specific to community policing. Officers receive community policing training from the first day of the police academy. Officers are instructed to approach all calls for service as problems for which they are in search of a solution. This training is continued in police service and in sciences and leadership, PSL, training provided to all officers 1 and 3 years after graduation from the academy. In addition to problem-solving emphasis in PSL, officers also receive updates and de-escalation, awareness of issues related to encounters with the mentally ill, community engagement, and understanding and minimizing any implicit bias. Prioritizing a commitment to community policing by department leaders. Command staff receive instruction and periodic updates at leadership enhancement and development sessions, leads, training on how to become effective at engaging with the community and best utilize their senior lead officers. Additionally, command staff are expected to hold bureau town halls to allow community leaders to use their voice to discuss their expectations of the department and its priorities. These town hall participants are partners with the department and its crime-fighting efforts. And with the voice of the community included, the town halls can result in a meaningful change and a positive communication loop between the department and the communities it serves. Most significantly, bureau town halls are encouraged after all significant policing events to build trust. The department does not want any individual or community to feel that policing was directed against them because of who they are. As such, Command staff will be trained to be responsible and accountable to the community. It is expected that they engage in dialogue with community leaders and members to explain why the department did or did not do any given action, and in turn listen and address any feedback. During ComStat, command officers are also held accountable for community engagement efforts. With the rollout of the new computer aid dispatch system, officers will be able to report specific time spent on this activity for each incident that they are assigned. Leveraging technology to provide quality assurance, in addition to the transparency and accountability aspects of body-worn video and digital in-car video, the department is on the cusp of implementing a pilot program to randomly inspect various police encounters for quality assurance purposes. The quality of the interaction between the officers and the public will be reviewed with an emphasis on adhering to the tenets of procedural justice. The adoption of nationwide reforms to minimize the youth recidivism. The department recognizes that for many offenders and crimes, it is not able to arrest its way out of the problem. Thus, the department has committed to adopting and in many ways leading the nation in implementing criminal justice reforms, such as expanding juvenile diversion programs. Our early efforts to implement juvenile diversion began in 2013 in Operation South Bureau. Today, the department is working with a community-based organization in 20 of our 21 area commands, and those organizations are as follows: the Sentinel Youth Services, Teen Court, Parents, Educators, and Students in Action, Champions in Service, formerly known as Communities in Schools, California Center for Equality and Justice, and the Hollenbeck PALS. The department has embraced these efforts and, as an example, has used diversion for approximately 40% of all juveniles arrested in 2019. The program is reflecting great promise for the future as we work closely with our community-based organizations. In closing, Commissioners, we readily acknowledge a history of injustice and understand its negative effects on trust. In the last 2 decades, the LAPD has strived to establish a culture of transparency and accountability as demonstrated in our policies, procedures, and practices. We engage every community with positive non-enforcement activities, particularly those neighborhoods that suffer from high rates of gang and gun violence. At every turn, we consider the effect of crime strategies on public trust, and we track that community trust in regular surveys in a variety of forums. While we are proud that we have created a diverse workforce reflective of our city, that alone is not a panacea which will change public perception. Our forward momentum should only be defined by our department's collective desire to be peacekeepers, peacemakers, and most importantly, peace seekers. We are aware of our department's history, and it is because of, not despite, our rigid defiance of our past mistakes that we measure our success today by building trust while reducing crime. Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to brief you on a few of our critical components of community policing. As someone who was raised in this city and now a 31-year veteran of this department, I have truly witnessed a change in our department that gives me great pride. All the while recognizing there is still more work to be done, I have no doubt that we will continue to work collaboratively to deepen trust and relationships through our community policing philosophy. I can now turn this over to Commander Woodruff for his remarks, if you'd like. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Chief.
Commander
Good
Woodruff,
morning,
I think
Chief.
the mic is working at the
it's
table
working
if you
now?
want to try that.
All right.
Commissioner President, will we have the ability, and will the public have the ability to get copies of the presentations if they're in writing? Maybe they could be put them together and put them online.
We can put them online.
It's very, very it's worth reading again.
Yes,
again.
and the transcript perhaps as well.
Yeah. Okay.
Testing. Perfect. Good morning, Chief. Good morning, distinguished board. I'm really excited, humbled to have a conversation with you. It's going to be a brief conversation about 2 of the programs that I believe have standing not only in the department, but more importantly, has standing in the community. So in 2015, President Obama commissioned a task force to strengthen community policing and trust among law enforcement and the communities that they serve, which led to the release of the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing report. The report sought to identify best practices and offer recommendations on how policing practices can promote effective crime reduction while building public trust. The 4th pillar of the report was on community policing and crime reduction, and stated that community policing requires that active building of positive relationships with the members of the community. The report goes on to recommend that community policing should be infused throughout the culture and organizational structure of law enforcement agencies. I stand before you with confidence that the Los Angeles Police Department has made a commitment to ensure that the concept of community safety partnership is infused into the DNA of the department. The department has convened a steering committee, which I'm the chair of, and they've been tasked with codifying and memorializing the best practices of community safety partnership. And we will be positioned as a department to ensure that this program is set up to not only remain as a national model for the future of policing, but is sufficiently supported administratively as we expand to other parts of the city. I recently had the opportunity to conduct a spontaneous and unannounced check at all the sites that we have throughout the city. I was hoping to talk to some officers, I was hoping to talk to the community, and hopefully I had an opportunity to talk to some of the community-based organizations. And I want to highlight two encounters that quite frankly brilliantly illustrate the primary tenets of community safety partnership, which are community outreach, youth programs, public safety, and that's going to be your critical enforcement piece, and safe passages. So example number one, when you hear the word safe passages, it conjures up visions of officers standing on corners, driving around, ensuring that our kids get to and from school safely. And that's what my vision of safe passages was. But quite frankly, when I went to Pueblo Del Rio in Newton Division, and I saw two of my officers standing in front of a school, not only standing in front of a school, but these kids walking up to these officers, knowing them by name, hugging those officers, and in turn, the officers knowing them by name. But what was key was the parents knew these officers by name and acknowledged their presence in that community. This community is primarily African American and Hispanic. And that's what community safety partnerships allows our officers to really engage the community and be present, not just present, but be involved. My second example I'm really excited about is at Harvard Park. Again, we partner with the housing authorities. We also partner with the Ballmer Group. And Harvard Park is one of those locations. And historically, Harvard Park is known for gang violence. In fact, that park was not used by the community for an extended period of time until CSP got there. When I say CSP, don't think it's just police officers. It's a collaboration with our partners. It's a collaboration with community-based organizations. It's a collaboration with Parks and Recs. Everybody's involved. Our grid partners are involved in this. So I get there, and when I say this park was teeming with activity, I saw moms, dads, men, women walking their dogs, walking the track, getting their exercise in. I saw a flag football team getting prepared to play that night. I saw police officers not just being in the park, but they were actually engaged in activities with the community. But I tell you this story to say this. There was an African-American lady, I don't know her age, don't even know her name. I approached her. She had a probably 1 to 2 year old kid in a stroller. And I asked her, I said, so you from this community? And she's like, no, I just moved here 3 weeks ago. I said, okay, all right. How do you like the park? She said, well, I came from Florida. I said, oh, so you're from Florida. Well, I'm actually from Zimbabwe. I moved to Florida in 2002. And I've heard horror stories about Los Angeles. And so here I am in Los Angeles, 3 weeks in. And I said, again, how do you like the park? She said, before I came to the park, I actually talked to Parks and Rec, the director, to say, hey, how safe is this park? And he said, this is the safest park in the city because we have police officers here. And in her mind, she didn't know what community safety partnership was. And she said, I walk 30 minutes every day to this park with my kid because I feel that it's safe. So community safety partnership. It wasn't just LAPD, it was Parks and Recs actually telling the folks that this place is safe. So today, since the inception of Community Safety Partnership in 2011, we currently have 8 sites. A total of 80 police officers, 9 sergeants, and 1 lieutenant 2. We are excited to open our 9th location in San Fernando Gardens Housing Development in February of 2020. But I would like to go back to the park example. The chief of police has consistently stated that it is not solely about the crime numbers. However, the crime numbers are great. I can tell you that the crime numbers are great this year. What is noteworthy and what goes to the core of community engagement is that the community perceives the community is safer. And I'm here to say that Harvard Park, the community feels that Harvard Park is safer. We know it's safer, but the community feels that the park is safer. At this point, I'd like to transition rather quickly over to the cadet program. I'd like to acknowledge our partner, the Ray Charles Foundation, who has graciously supported this program for the years to provide scholarship opportunities for our cadets, clothing, and other items to ensure that this program is successful. The cadet program is for youth between the ages of 13 and 17, and the cornerstones of the program are leadership, academic excellence, decision-making skills, and community service. The cadet program is designed to offer an opportunity to develop skills that will help them throughout their lives while working with the finest police officers in the country. It's offered at 21 community police stations across the city, as well as at 7 specialized divisions. We currently have 250 participating in the Cadet Academy and approximately 1,500 cadets and recruits citywide. Our cadets are exposed to financial literacy, public speaking, field trips, and other interactive activities. And what's unique about our cadet program is that there's a parent academy component of this, where we have the parents involved in our cadet program. And again, they cover subject matters such as financial literacy, underage drinking, teenage mental health, and bullying and drug awareness. And I know, just for statistical reference, and I'll close with this, there have been a total of 5,357 cadets that have graduated over the past 5 years. And there's been a total of 615 parents that have graduated from the academy over the past 3 years. And they're acknowledged at our graduations. And if there's no questions for me, I'd like to pass it briefly over to my partner, Aaron Ponce, to talk about our POPs and PAMS program. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir?
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm the commanding officer of our Community Outreach and Development Division, and 2 of our marquee programs under my division are the POPs and the PAMS. In 1995, former school board member and president Roberta Weintraub, troubled by the ongoing tension between the city's youth and law enforcement, brought to the Los Angeles Police Department and the Los Angeles Unified School District together to collaborate on ways to foster youth and police relationships in an academic environment. Together, the department and the school district crafted the idea of a specialized law enforcement school. The result was the Los Angeles Police Academy Magnet School, known as PAMS. Although the magnet school concept was not new to the district, a police magnet school was. In 1996, 2 PAMS programs were opened, San Pedro High School and Monroe High School in the Valley. Today, we foster a 23-year partnership with the school district. And just this year, our newest schools, Fairfax High School and West Adams High School, expanded to include 9th and 10th grade students. We anticipate that the PAMS program will soon be the largest community youth program in the LAPD. The PAM program now includes 9 high schools and 2 junior high schools, with a total of 1,350 students. In the fall of 2020, Banning High School in San Pedro will begin its PAMS program. That site is currently hosts a fire program in conjunction with the Los Angeles Fire Department. The PAM program offers rigorous high school career pathway curriculum developed for young men and women who express an interest in law enforcement careers. The program provides a better understanding of law enforcement for the students, no matter what career path they eventually follow. The idea of having officers and teachers working together to provide specialized instruction to our youth interested in a law enforcement career path was a novel form of collaboration. Originally, it was called Cops in the Classroom, and at the time of its development was the first of its kind. The program emphasizes communication and listening skills, concepts of criminal law, physical and mental health, computer science, and community service. Each PAM school has a full-time LAPD officer assigned to the program and now a Los Angeles school police officer. He or she teaches the physical training classes and works with the program's coordinator and other teachers to incorporate criminal justice lectures, guest speakers into the curriculum. They are also ambassadors for the program, conducting ongoing recruitment. The officers are mentors not only to the PAM students, but to all students on campuses. Many of our PAM's officers mentor other students and teach additional physical fitness principles to the students. To further expose these students to the many facets of police work, the students attend field trips to the LAPD Bomb Squad, Mounted Unit, LAPD Historical Society, or the Historical Museum, the Crime Lab, and various training facilities. PAM students also assist at LAPD events, such as the Heart of LAPD, which was held in September, in addition to Students Run LA, that was just held this last weekend, and other city-sponsored events. Bonds are formed because many students see the officers as someone who is tangible and caring. In many cases, the officers become a guiding figure, absent in many of the teens' lives. Here lies the true impact of the program. Perhaps the flagship of the program, led by program coordinator Elise Kenyon, is located at Reseda High School, which opened in 1998, with preparing to serve as its motto. Reseda features state-of-the-art forensic science lab, an annual CSI event, juvenile law classes, and a linked learning approach that incorporates law enforcement into all classes. The seniors also attend a field trip to Washington, D.C. to participate in National Police Week. And now, the first college courses in collaboration with Mission College are being held at Reseda High School. In 2019, the graduating class of PAM saw 152 seniors receive their diplomas. Of those graduates, 30 will be attending Cal State schools, 22 attending UC schools, and 16 entering military service. These same students contributed 22,000 hours of community service. The most recent evidence of the success of PAMS comes from the class of 2019, where the overall graduation rate exceeded 95% compared to 78% in the district. Looking for ways to transition PAM students to a college platform brought the Police Orientation Preparation Program, POP, to life. This was a collaboration between Roberta, the department, the Los Angeles Community College District. Her vision was to create a college preparation school that would provide service-minded individuals to pathway to the Department of Higher Education. In 2019, the POPS program was launched with approximately 15 students. This year, we have approximately 150 students cycle through that program a year. Just in 2017, we continued the collaboration with Cal State LA, and our POPS students who graduate out of our POPS program have a direct link into the Criminal Justice Bachelor's program at Cal State LA. It's a direct linkage. This fosters the relationship between us, school police, our community, the parents, and our students, which ultimately fosters better relationships and healthier communities. Thank you.
Very much. Commissioners, I'm sure we have a lot of questions, but today is our day for listening, and out of respect for all the people who are waiting, unless there is objection, I'd like to proceed to our next round of speakers. Thank you very much. I know you put a great deal of time into that presentation, as has everyone here today. Thank you very much. Now we're going to turn to the broad category of national best practices in community policing, and we're very honored today as a commission and as Los Angeles to have Vanita Gupta here with us, the president and CEO at the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. She's also the former Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General of Civil Rights at the Department of Justice. So thank you very much, Ms. Gupta, for joining us today. We truly appreciate you taking the time, traveling here to Los Angeles, and we look forward to your remarks.
Great. It's great to be here. Good morning, President Decker, Vice President Goldsmith, commissioners, and the commission staff, Police Chief Moore, and members of the folks behind me. Since I don't know who everyone is. So as Eileen mentioned, I am Vanita Gupta, President and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, which is a coalition of more than 220 national civil and human rights organizations from around the country working for an America as good as its ideals. I previously served as head of the Justice Department Civil Rights Division from 2014 to January 2017, where I oversaw the federal government's enforcement mandate of fair and constitutional policing around the country, and interacted a lot and very deeply with the law enforcement community and communities that were deeply engaged in really promoting a transformation of relationships between law enforcement and communities, promoting public safety, building community police trust, and respecting the dignity of all people. I began my tenure at the Civil Rights Division just 2 months after 18-year-old Michael Brown had been shot and killed by a police officer in Ferguson, Missouri. And tensions were high, as all of us can quite well remember, not only in St. Louis, but really around the nation. And every week that I was on the job, it seemed there was another video of police violence that had gone viral. And the movement for Black Lives was really forcing a national conversation about race and policing and public safety, and the public was demanding accountability. And at the time, a lot of folks in communities were very fixated around this notion of body-worn cameras as being somehow the answer to these issues. And to me, at that time, it really revealed that people in the public had too little information about policing, too little understanding of how policing works in order to access the very broad range of reforms that could fuel accountability, trust, and transparency. In response, and you all know this, President Obama's Task Force on 21st Century Policing, which I know you've been following very closely, released that report in 2015 with recommendations to ensure fair and effective policing, or to inspire it around the country. And the Civil Rights Division was also involved in a handful of jurisdictions to address discriminatory policing and systemic civil rights violations. The Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services, or the COPS office, at the time was providing a lot of support to police departments to implement best practices that came out of this report. The reality is that we're facing a far different landscape today. We have a Justice Department that in too many instances has largely receded from policing reform, and state and local leaders and leadership has had to really step in, I think really as a role, not only a role, but a responsibility to promote the values of fairness, equity, procedural justice, transparency, and accountability within law enforcement agencies. In a nation with more than 17,000 police departments and no national police force, it's really state and local leadership on these issues that is going to make the difference, and we know that. And that's why actually in March of 2019, the Leadership Conference Education Fund, which I had launched this report, it was an initiative, but launched the Near Era of Public Safety Initiative and a report, which is the weight of a Sears catalog, but you can find it online. But it was an effort to amass and aggregate a decade of police reform, harnessing the power of data and supporting communities and police departments as they reimagine new paradigms for public safety. This report, and I think we're going to make sure that every member of the commission that's present today has a copy, is designed to go one layer deeper with concrete recommendations for achieving the principles that were laid out in President Obama's task force report. And in developing the recommendations that are in this report, we surveyed the field for best practices and policies. We reviewed DOJ consent decrees. We consulted with advocates, impacted communities, subject matter experts. We reviewed reports and publications from leading organizations, including the International Association of Chiefs of Police and the Police Executive Research Forum, national advocacy organizations like the American Civil Liberties Union, and government agencies, as I mentioned, like the Justice Department's COPS office and Civil Rights Division. We offer best practices in this report that are grounded in research and data, but we know that meaningful reform isn't going to happen on its own. And I want to say that I don't believe that the LAPD can do this work on its own, and I want to pick up on something that Commissioner Goldsmith mentioned, I think it's a little hard to hear, but about the need to actually also engage other parts of government and the social sector community, because we have had a system over the last 40 years, it's really been exacerbated in many ways, that has overly relied on, or in some cases exclusively relied on, arrest and incarceration as the answer to a whole host of social problems. We know that at every point in the system, from policing to prosecution to sentencing to reentry, we know for certainty that racial disparities exist at every stage of the system. And we know that too many people are criminalized and incarcerated, and this has actually become a bipartisan issue. But in many ways, it's also unfairly situated police officers on the front lines of our nation's social and mental health crises. And we can't expect officers to be the first responders in every situation. But nor should lawmakers make criminalization the first response to all social problems. And the public health response, I think, to the current opioid crisis presents a different model to approach these issues and to finding solutions that we need to continue to propagate. We also know that we aren't going to advance a new paradigm of public safety that keeps communities and police safe without really connecting the dots between policing and the justice system more broadly, and between policing and education and housing and mental health, and the investment in those issues by city government. And so it's at this time, given the amount of bipartisan support to really address our crisis of incarceration in this country, that we have to rethink antiquated approaches to public safety, which have disproportionately affected Black and brown communities and failed to address serious public health issues that contribute to crime. And so we have to push on those paradigms. The urgency of the moment, I think, really calls for state and local leaders to take action and get this right. And we commend the board's dedication and determination to promoting accountability, transparency, and fairness. While the Los Angeles Police Department, it was great to hear those presentations, has made really significant steps in implementing best practices in the President's Task Force report, we all know that it can go further. And that by working together with communities, the Commission can really articulate a new era of public safety that respects the dignity and humanity of all people. So in particular, and I am not going to go in too deeply into this report, I'm going to be very top line, just about a few things. I would urge you to take a look. But in particular, the Leadership Conference offers the following recommendations is based on national best practices to the Commission. This isn't an exhaustive list. The departments we know have to adopt holistic and comprehensive slate of reforms, and our report lays out in detail about 100 policy recommendations. I will say also several of the staff that participated in President Obama's task force are actually participated in the creation of this report, understanding that a lot of police departments, including the LAPD, had very seriously engaged those recommendations, but we needed to go a little bit more granular into what was needed. So on one issue, we are recommending that the city commit sufficient resources to really implement community policing. As has been mentioned, community policing is not kind of one siloed department in the police department. It's a real process in which police departments actively build meaningful relationships with community members to improve public safety and advance community goals. It puts the community's voice at the center of decision-making processes and ensures that voice is reflected in departmental policies, practices, training, resource allocation, and accountability systems. And to be clear, community policing is not the responsibility of a few officers. It's really an approach that all officers should take in their work. When I was at the Justice Department, there were consent decrees in places like Seattle and Cleveland that had created civilian commissions or bodies that informed training and accountability systems so that there was a direct, formalized, and structured way for community leaders to have a voice in shaping those policies. When working to rebuild trust, departments have to acknowledge the long and complex history between communities of color and police officers. And reconciliation is a process that really opens and can be the opening door to communication between communities and police, allowing all sides to engage and openly discuss the damage that policing has caused communities historically, to air grievances and to address the narratives that interfere with efforts to improve public safety. I will just say, and this is maybe a little bit out of school, but that if it is too difficult to have the commission be in the community and have a constructive set of conversations in the community without people being shouting or totally disrupting, that there's oftentimes very trusted community groups that can hold those meetings and facilitate them or get the input themselves and share what they can with the commission, because there has to be ways to get those voices into your work. Your work is so important, and I'm sure that you all have thought about those things, but if it can't be you, it can be others to actually make sure that that happens. Departments also have to encourage communities to participate in the development and delivery of community policing training. Involving communities furthers the 21st Century Policing Task Force's recommendation of adopting the principle of procedural justice for all internal policies and interactions. The second issue I wanted to take up was about the need to take corrective action when data indicates bias-based policing. Police leaders should be clear that explicit bias is against the law, morally and ethically wrong, and antithetical to the field's fundamental mission to provide services equitably to all people. Supervisors should closely monitor officers to detect and address biased enforcement activities. This involves not only reviewing and analyzing officer-generated reports, but also department-wide data that may indicate officers who are statistical outliers when compared with fellow officers, and if any policies or practices have disproportionate effects on marginalized communities. If statistical or other data indicate that a facially neutral policy is producing disparities or negative perceptions, leaders should review and evaluate and possibly rescind the policy, and they should consider updating training curricula to address practices that lead to those disparities. For officers, stop searches and arrests are everyday activities, but for members of the public, they are hardly routine. And policy should encourage officers to consider the costs of stop searches and arrests in communities. Just as one example, while pretextual stops have been upheld by the United States Supreme Court, they are not necessarily ethical or effective and can be the basis of racial profiling. And a recent LA Times analysis that you all are probably quite familiar with found that black drivers stopped by the LAPD were 4 times more likely to be searched than a white driver, and Latino drivers were 3 times more likely to be searched in the 10-month period reviewed. It's our recommendation that the department should end the use of pretextual stops, engage the community, and acknowledge these disparities to repair the damage done. There's also a lot of other ways to limit the use of pretextual stops, but I think ultimately we have seen in other departments that have ended the use of them, that has had a really positive impact on community police relations. And 3, departments should use force only when necessary. And I know in August of this year, Governor Newsom signed AB 392 into law. I also know the LAPD has been at the forefront of really pushing on de-escalation policies. I've been in rooms before with Chief Beck when there was a large push in 2016 and 2017 to do that. But I do think this law is also really important. The law is going to require police officers to use lethal force when necessary. I think it's going to be important that the LAPD take measures to ensure that its policies and trainings conform to this new standard. The implementation and evaluation of the law should be a transparent process that meaningfully engages community members. And lastly, that the LAPD should continue its reevaluation of its predictive policing program in line with some of the American Civil Liberties Union's recommendations. There is a large body of evidence, and now included the report most recently by OIG, showing that in cities that have used predictive policing that there hasn't been a direct relationship with or impact on reducing crime. The damage that is done by the use of these programs can far outweigh, in this instance, what the data is showing about impact on crime. I think it's important for the commission to look at that, look at the impact of the program and on, the heavy monitoring and surveillance of Black and Latino communities has a questionable correlation with a reduction in crime and can really undermine the efforts to repair community trust. I know this is an ongoing conversation and would urge you all to continue to have, to do that reevaluation as necessary. So There's more that I could say. There's plenty more to say. I'm going to be catching a flight soon, but I'm open to any questions that you may have about this, and I hope that this report will be a resource to all of you.
Thank you very much. I was aware that you did have a flight to catch when I asked the commission not to ask questions of the prior panelists, but if you have a few moments, if there are any questions from the commission. Mr. Soboroff, Commissioner Goldsmith.
Thank you. I will make sure you have it.
I
Absolutely.
understand from your staff it's being sent to all members of the commission. Commissioner Goldsmith, anything?
Thank you so much for that. Really would love to spend lots of time digging into each point you made, which I know we don't have time to do today, although that book seems quite long, so
Yes.
perhaps the details are in there. But would you mind expanding a little bit on the recommendation to just end pretext stops, and maybe if you could share how that has been done elsewhere, and I mean the nuances of doing something like that?
Yeah, you know what I would love to do is actually give you a list of some of the departments that we've worked with that actually made pretty significant changes, because I actually forgot to bring that with me. But, and one of the things the report does is it's not just kind of pie in the sky recommendations, it's actually lifting up particular police departments that have taken steps by way of like modeling what they have done on these various recommendations. And so, but on the pretextual stops, we have just found, and this was, I say we as the leadership conference, but I will also say the evidence from the Justice Department when we were looking at ways in which police departments that we were investigating were engaging in pretextual stops, that in numerous instances there was, it had really eroded and created such distrust in the community and had not actually served and found contraband or the like in with any significant percentages, and such that the harms were far outweighed what the kind of public safety benefits were of using pretextual stops. And I will provide you a list of the departments that have done that and kind of what we have observed in the process of them making those significant changes.
Thank you.
Is that a separate report from this? Because I
On
have
pretextual
looked
stops?
at this at the
Yeah,
departments.
I'll just send you the names of departments that have taken really important actions on that.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Yes.
We greatly appreciate your time, and we are very honored that you took time out of your very busy schedule and to be here from Washington, D.C. We're truly grateful that you took the time and shared that overview of your report. Thank you so much.
To do it, and thank you for doing what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Thank you again. And we're going to move on to our Gang Reduction Youth Development Program. Ms. Tremblay, I understand you helped assemble a team of community members who will be presenting today and speaking with us. And if you could give an introduction and introduce the members of the community who are here today to share their experiences.
I sure will. Good morning, President Decker and police commissioners. I'm very pleased to be here on behalf of Mayor Garcetti and the members of the GRID office, as well as the 25 community-based organizations, our GRID providers, that provide the direct prevention and intervention services in the communities of highest need that GRID serves. You've heard before about GRID's comprehensive approach to violence reduction, our 4 pillars: prevention, intervention, violence interruption, and community engagement. GRID is very proud of the role that we play in supporting and enhancing the department's efforts with regard to community policing, relationship-based policing, and community trust building. And we do that through mostly through our 25 community-based providers in the community, but we also do that through the various ways that we work with the department. Those include trainings. So officers participate in GRID trainings for GRID intervention workers, and our our intervention workers and other grid providers participate in training with LAPD, including the law enforcement gang intervention awareness training. Officers are key to both officers and command level staff to our marquee Levita, our Violence Interruption Training Academy, which has been going on for many years, that certifies our intervention workers, and the department plays a role in that. We also, as you're well aware, use our Fall Friday nights, our other community events, and in particular our Summer Night Lights program at 32 recreation centers every summer as a base and a place where it's sort of a built-in opportunity for the police and the community to get to know one another, to interact, and to have that happen in a positive and productive and relationship-based way rather than from everyday enforcement that may happen, particularly in communities where there's high levels of violence and communities of color. We also convene GRID partnership meetings on a monthly basis with our prevention and intervention providers and each of the areas that they serve. So that's a way for that relationship to build and grow. And then, as you're well aware, on an everyday basis, through our incident response protocol, in which our intervention workers and our GRID team respond to all gang shootings and homicides, we have that relationship growing and building through regular communication in response to those incidents of violence. And that has really helped to build trust and understanding, everyone understanding each other's roles and responsibilities and the limits to those, but again, bringing that voice of the community and understanding of the community to the department. We did have multiple partners scheduled to be here today. Unfortunately, Ms. Membrano from Barrio Action Network had a family emergency and wasn't able to be here today. And I think we might get one more in before we're finished, but we have two really incredible partners who are here and present right now who will share their experiences with you. First is Mr. Skip Townsend from Second Call, and he will be followed by Mr. Fernando Rejon from the Urban Peace Institute, and I will leave it to them.
Welcome, both of you.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for having us, President, Vice President, Chief, and the Commission. My name is Skip Townsend, and for over 10 years, I worked with the GRID direct as a subcontractor with either Community Build or with Soledad Enrichment Action. So I have been a CIW working in the streets with violence intervention. I am now currently the executive director of Second Call, but I still work in capacity as a consultant and ambassador with the GRID office, so I'm in constant contact. Not sure what happened this morning. I do not want to ignore an elephant in the room, and that is just not my experience. It is not my experience to have been shut down and not be able to speak to the chief. As a matter of fact, my experience is just totally different. I have seen the chief at a town hall meeting, which I facilitated in Watts, but I've also seen the chief on his own as he came to speak to the community about his decision and how he's going to redirect the Metro officers. So let me just first say that I too threw stones and had bad words about the Metro and the way they police in our community. So it was a blessing for me to hear about how they were going to be redirected and reassigned. One of the things that one of the Metro officers took me to the side at one of the trainings that LAPD has. I believe Ann Tremblay just spoke about how the GRID supports those trainings as well, and we are present. One of the officers said, "Hey, Skip, thank you for letting us keep our cars." And I was like trying to understand what he meant, but one of the things that during our conversation when the chief came to the community and he was talking about reassigning them, he talked about putting them in black and white so they would be visible. But it was my understanding that this is an elite group, and because they're an elite group, I didn't want them to feel as if they were being demoted or being reprimanded or anything. I want them to keep their self-esteem so that they would be happy to be in our communities. And I believe that the chief heard us speaking, and that's why that officer was so adamant to tell me. I guess he thought it was me who helped him keep the car. But those are the type of relationships that we need in the community. When the chief came to second call. Let me say he's come twice to second call. He's also come to ceasefire. I've also seen him at the Watts Gang Task Force meeting. So he's in the community having these conversations that need to be had, and and also at the swim center, at the Epic Center, when once again I was throwing rocks, about the way our community is being policed. So for me, I believe that he has heard everything that we've said and he's responded. He's come into the community, and let me backtrack to April 1st. April 1st, one of the greatest tragedies in South Central LA happened actually the day before, when Nipsey Hussle was killed. And even though he was looked at as just a rapper or whatever, he meant a lot to the community. Matter of fact, he meant a lot to the world, because we have visitors come from all over the country to come to see that. One of the greatest blessings that happened out of that is individuals who were not intervention workers, never had the opportunity to have the relationships that myself and Fernando have. They decided that they wanted to bring an accord of peace. They wanted to bring the communities together and use this as an opportunity. Well, just to be frankly honest, it scared a lot of people to have over 1,500 to 2,000 individuals who claim to be gang members. They definitely said, we are gang members and we want to meet at this intersection. So it was a fear of what could happen, what would happen, and South Bureau and the other agencies that helped out, there was a sense of nervousness. And I received a call. At the time, I had no idea who it was, but it was the actual chief of police who called me and said, I heard you're having an issue. And I said, yes, I am. He said, well, let's look for a reason to say yes instead of a reason to say no. And at that point, I wanted to go out with a shirt on, he's my chief, or whatever. I couldn't do that, of course. I couldn't, have signs and say that. But what was allowed to happen is one of the greatest peace agreements that have happened since 1992. And I was also present in 1992 when the Metro units came into the Imperial Courts projects and shut down everything that, there's a young man here named Donnie who was part of that. Donnie and Hank were part of the original team that happened in 1992. Well, we were shut down as we tried to meet and bring peace to the community. So I want to say that my experience has been different under this leadership. It started for me with Chief Bratton, who began to listen, and that's all we wanted, was for someone to listen, and Chief Bratton brought that to the department. Also, when Chief Charlie Beck was a deputy chief, he came and met us in the alley, myself and my mentor, Darren Bo Taylor. He met us in the alley of 31st and Gramercy, where there had been a couple of homicides before, and he came and met us by himself in soft clothes. So I take my hat off, starting with Brandon to Beck, and it's getting better with Michael Moore. Also, the relationship with the city is great. They help us navigate through the things that maybe on the streets we can't, when we have certain lieutenants and certain sergeants that don't truly understand. I don't have to call the chief with the problems. The city of LA, the GRID office, has RPCs who we can contact, and they help us with those relationships. So I'm looking for the flaws, I'm looking for the problems, and right now I just don't see them. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Fernando Rejon. I'm the Executive Director of the Urban Peace Institute. We work to implement violence reduction strategies and smart justice solutions to end violence and mass incarceration so communities can thrive. Currently, we provide community safety assessments, officer training, and technical support for the implementation of the Community Safety Partnership, LAPD's Community Safety Partnership, to ensure fidelity with the relationship-based policing model. We're also longtime GRID contractors who administer gang intervention contracts in South LA, as well as we train and certify all city contracted gang intervention workers through La Vida, and we've been doing that for the last 9 years. So both CSP and GRID were created in response to the youth gang homicide epidemic in Los Angeles. The tactics used by LAPD during the war on gangs and war on drugs have devastated communities, but also hindered public trust, particularly with communities of color. So GRID was created to provide concentrated investment in the most impacted areas of the city, utilizing wraparound prevention and violence intervention services and strategies to provide alternatives to violence using a public health framework. So the importance of having a relationship-based policing model, a different type of policing, for law enforcement to give enough space to listen to community members, as well as having investment, a comprehensive investment in prevention and intervention infrastructure in the community, really takes public safety to another level. So what we learned in LA is policing alone will not increase overall safety, but increased investment in gang intervention and other support services in gang-involved communities, strategic collaboration, as Skip shared, as well as the recalibration of policing approaches will increase overall public safety. So as a part of the broader comprehensive safety strategy, relationship-based policing is an important component in conjunction with community support services. And I think it's important to differentiate kind of traditional community policing from relationship-based policing. And in short, what we like to say is relationship-based policing is working with the people that don't like you. It's not cup of coffee with a cop. It's not working with those that are your cheerleaders. It's working with the people that maybe have been afraid of you, have been historically marginalized by you. It is about reconciliation, as the woman said earlier today, but also, and this is a big piece because this goes to budget, you have to invest in communities. So it's not just investment in law enforcement and providing more cops more time to spend and provide customer service for their constituents, but it's also about investing in building community leadership, investing in building community infrastructure so that communities can thrive and take responsibility for their safety. So both GRID and CSP are seen as national models and are important components to a comprehensive violence reduction strategy, kind of as evidenced by Chicago. We have funders and other partners that are coming back from Chicago saying, LA has its fingerprints all over the violence reduction strategy there, and even the former chief, right, being recruited to be out there as well. So we're seeing some of that transition, but we're seeing the impact that LA has had. I think it's a closely guarded secret that needs to get out there, and I think it's evidenced by what's happening as people from around the country are looking at what the police department, what the police department is doing, but also the level of city investment in communities that have been historically impacted by violence, and then the leadership, such as Donnie and Skip and some of the other brothers and sister intervention workers here, that are taking the lead to say, look, we're gonna create a truce that we have not seen since 1992, right? That is very unique, I think, in the country. So to support relationship-based policing efforts, community resources like those provided by the GRID are needed, where young people can be referred to for services, so such as diversion, which I believe someone will be talking about later on. LA has achieved a threshold of safety over the past decade, but it can easily be erased if we do not continue to invest. All of this can be erased quickly. I think if we take our foot off the pedal and we stop investing in gang intervention, we stop looking at a comprehensive strategy, we don't hold law enforcement accountable for relationship-based policing tactics, we're gonna lose the gains that we've made, and we've seen it historically. We've had a decade of strong momentum, but I feel we need to get below, we've been below 300 homicides for about 10 years now, which is phenomenal, but I'm tired of saying that to people and to cities across the country, because now we gotta get below 200, and then after that we gotta get below 100. And we do need a vision zero for gang-related homicides in the city of LA, but what does that take? It takes investment and it takes coordination between community, between the city, and law enforcement. So just a couple of recommendations. LAPD should fully embrace the CSP approach and make it part of their DNA, which requires it to be reflected in its budget. We see CSP as the future of American policing that can really transform.
You give your recommendations a little slower so we can take them really seriously.
I sure will. Thank you.
We can't write that fast, yeah.
Sorry, I thought I had 3 minutes, but it's probably been 5.
Got time.
So LAPD should fully embrace the CSP approach and really make it part of their DNA. And part of that is that it has to be reflected in the budget, not just a small line item, but it really needs to be invested in, because we see it as the future of American policing. It can really help transform how policing is done. And it's not traditional community policing. Every department has community policing strategies. This is a community policing strategy that requires multi-sector investment in communities most impacted, as well as long-term relationships where the incentive for officers is not arrest only, it is to build relationships with the community that they're serving. Captain Amada Tingarides will call it, she calls it cultural policing at times, because she says if you understand the culture of a community, it's easier to police it, and you can police it more fairly and equitable. And in the end, it's not warrior policing, it's guardian policing. If people feel that you're there as a guardian and not as a warrior, they will be more willing to work with you and isolate the bad actors in the community. Number 2, strengthen the infrastructure, the internal department infrastructure to support CSP. So what does CSP need internally? Does it need a bureau? Does it need command staff in order to support the 100+ officers that are now part of the CSP program? And that requires investment. It requires some vision for what is needed to actually sustain this approach that is early results. They haven't come out, but the talk is that the results are good as far as an evaluation. So we're looking at, potentially the evaluation coming out sometime in February. I know the chief will get briefed on that as well. Really looking forward to the results after we started in 2011, so about after 8 years of community safety partnership, what those results look like. Gang intervention in LA should be strengthened to support the comprehensive violence reduction strategy and leverage relationship-based policing efforts. So for example, what we've seen in the various housing developments in South Park and Harvard Park is that because we've done all the assessments, we've had a ground level view of what the community dynamics are on the ground. The fact that there are intervention workers there, the fact that there are grid services there, really help leverage and support relationship-based policing efforts, and it supports officers' thinking. And so as officers are there, and they can exercise discretion and decide whether to make an arrest or not, they have an opportunity to divert them to a diversion program, Sentinel Youth Services, or they can go divert them to a grid program, providing prevention or gang intervention services, which is an important tool because officers will always say, we don't know what exists out there. We don't have those resources. What are the tools that we can utilize to help us increase safety if we don't want to arrest this young person? So continued investment in that strategy is important. And then lastly, LA should develop a vision of how investment in grid services and relationship-based policing can further drive down violence. Like I said, we want to get below 200, then we want to get to 0. And how do we do that? It takes everybody. We're not going to rest our way out of this, as everyone has said. But also, too, is that we have to invest in the community, building community capacity in order to help redefine safety in LA. And that'll actually make a mark across the country, which it already is. And thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Ms. Tremblay, I understood there was perhaps someone else. Oh, please don't get up yet, gentlemen. I think we may have questions. If there's another speaker, just let me know.
Apparently en route, but not here.
Well, when they do arrive, we'll be able to fit that person in. Questions for our presenters today? If I could ask both speakers. With respect to the CSP program, the Commission has heard many positive things about the program, and of course, sir, you spoke specifically to it, but I wonder if you could provide a little more, a few more examples of how it is benefiting the community. I'm aware there may be another speaker later today who will be addressing this from her perspective, but if you could provide yours on the specific benefits of the program, what you're seeing on the ground that perhaps we're not seeing. We see numbers, we hear anecdotes, but I'd like to hear your perspective more thoroughly on that.
You want to share some?
So there's a number of things. Let me go back to the beginning when it first started. I remember them coming into the Jordan Down housing projects, and it was kind of a challenge for some of the intervention workers to get the community to buy into the fact that these officers were going to be a part of the community. And what I saw about 2 or 3 months later when the summer came and there were backpack giveaways and there were haircuts and the officers had actually started making contact with the children, the parents, the grandparents. So in some of these housing projects, some of these parks, even South Park, even though it's not housing projects, you have 5th and 6th generation that have lived in that same community. So when these officers start making, building relationships with the children that might be 12, 13, 14 years old, it also builds a relationship with the parents who are in their late 30s, also builds a relationship with the grandmothers in the 60s, and now you have what I believe I heard that Captain Amata had spoke about, Tangarides, that now you have a cultural buy-in. Now you know the culture of the community and not just the child. So I think that's one of the key components is, with the CSP program and the officers are there 5 years, it really gets them to build a relationship. One of my complaints has always been with LAPD after 18 months, the dynamics look different. You know, the officers have changed there and they've either promoted or things of that nature. So with CSP, there is actual time to build a relationship and not only follow the child for 5 years, but also keep up with the parents and how they're doing and have these resources available because sometimes the parents need them just as much as the child.
Thank you, sir.
So as I stated earlier, there's an evaluation that's going to be coming out, so we're looking forward to that. But a lot of anecdotal evidence. One was a story shared by a deputy chief, it was Chief Green at the time, is that there was a shooting suspect in one of the housing developments, one of the smaller housing developments that did not have CSP. So LAPD was going to go in and go get them, and traditionally how they do it. They ended up pulling them back and saying, let's get some CSP officers from the surrounding housing developments to come in. They knocked on doors for 2 hours and just talked to people and said, hey, we're looking for somebody, this is what's going on. They left. As soon as they left, they started getting phone calls saying, come in here and get them. LAPD was able to go in there. They didn't have to kick down any doors, throw grandma on the floor, scare the kids or anything. They walked in, found the suspect, and got him, right? So as far as that being a very important kind of story about how to police the community more effectively when you build some level of community trust and you enter a community treat a community with dignity and respect. The other piece is, and this is more well known because this was in the LA Times, and forgive me if I mess up some of the details, but there was a officer-involved shooting in the Nickerson Gardens. And Donnie's here so he can speak specifically to this. Long story short, officer-involved shooting, someone from the community. Community was out there. At the same time, there's another young person that was having a seizure. So you had CSP, and then you had other LAPD officers there, and it could have easily gone riot. As the other kid was having a seizure, you had CSP run to them because they knew the kid, and they administered CPR. This officer was, as she was administering CPR, his vomit was getting in her mouth, and she was spitting it out, but continuing to blow air into his lungs, trying to save this young man's life. So it's a situation where a terrible tragedy of having a young person shot in the community, particularly an officer-involved shooting, but then at the same time having a young person who's dying from a seizure, and you have CSP officers there because they know the person and the community trusts them, it just created this juxtaposition of what policing is and what it could look like. So it could have easily been skirmish line, hats and bats, but because of the relationships that CSP officers had, and then OG pulled the officer aside and said, I really respect you for doing that, because I wouldn't even have done that, right? And so I think that is the power of when you invest in building relationships, and it is expensive because to provide time for officers to sit there, to talk, to engage consistently with the community, but the benefits, the long-term benefits of that are transformative. It's not just transactional, it's transformative. And if we're looking at creating a model of policing or an approach to policing that is transformative, it's going to require us to change the way policing is done. Without sacrificing safety of officers, of course, but also to make sure that there's a vision for what is possible. And we've seen some soft data shows, the youth arrest rates in Jordan Downs dropped 50%. In Harvard Park, there's a huge drop in violence, which is highly significant. And Harvard Park is the first site that was outside of a housing project to see what it would look like if you focused around a community area.
Thank you for that. Commissioners, did you have questions?
Thank you. Yes. Tell me your name again, sir.
Fernando.
Thank you for all of that. You began to expand on it just now, but if you wouldn't mind expanding a little bit more on this notion that you've touched on, which you characterize as redefining safety and community, transformative approach, a vision for what's possible. Could you say a little bit more about what that would look like?
Well, part of the when we look at what's happening statewide in California with the criminal justice reform work, the redirecting of resources into communities, as we're closing the school-to-prison pipelines or the community-to-prison pipelines and people are actually getting out of prison, is what do we have, what investment is there in the community so that they can actually thrive and that there's other opportunities? I think violence prevention, looking at it from a comprehensive lens where it's not just on law enforcement. The war on gangs and the war on drugs, it was suppression only, aggressive policing, and we saw where that's gotten us. Then a lot of people locked up, kind of fed mass incarceration. What we're seeing now is that when you invest more broadly, you invest in community-based organizations, in community leaders, gang intervention workers, you get other agencies involved, a multi-sector approach to addressing safety. What we see is it makes it safer for officers, it makes the city safer, it provides career pathways, and it invests in building leadership at the community level to take ownership of public safety. Before it was just like, that's just law enforcement. Let law enforcement do their thing, it's us versus them. But now if it's us for us, where there is comprehensive investment sustained at a large scale, that transforms how we view safety and how communities are policed. because it makes them part of the solution. It doesn't make them recipients of safety. It makes them partners in safety. And that's why the beauty of it is community safety partnership, partnership being the key word. It's not officers alone. It's community. But in order for community, we were training command officers the other day, and we said, community, don't expect them to meet you halfway, especially in these communities. Go all the way to the other side of the bridge and bring them to the halfway point. And maybe it's not you that did it, but it's the legacy of policing within LAPD that they're carrying when they're wearing that uniform. And it's being transformed, but they have the responsibility to go the step further, and they can't just expect community to meet them halfway if for years there's been that fear and there's been that sense of occupation. And so we're seeing that happen, I think, as Skip is sharing about LAPD starting to meet people more than halfway and starting to talk to people more and be more communicative, but also investment in the GRID program, investment in community leaders has helped change that dynamic, because now they're more confident to speak to LAPD and meet them in the middle and have a better conversation about what safety looks like.
Thank you. Commissioner Soboroff?
I've seen at Expo Center and at a number of parks where the City Department, Recreation and Parks, in conjunction with us and the community, is able to create a synergy that goes way beyond what any of us could do individually. And now that that Harvard Park has been added, just an incredible transformations. Will you talk a little bit about the synergy, both guys, between the importance of the right park director and the right police officer, and not everybody's right for every situation.
Well, I can say, let me go back to the beginning of Summer Night Lights when it was first the Summer of Success. So I take my hat off to Martin Letlow for investing in that. Well, one of the things that it created, it started to begin what we now have as relationships. So the relationships were hard back then. There were officers who were not knowing what to expect. Kyle Jackson was the captain of Southwest at the time, and he didn't know what to expect. Just as well as the community, they started looking at intervention workers like, what are you doing hugging the police? How are you building a relationship? So what we have when we started Summer Night Lights in 2008 or 9, I can't remember, maybe Hank can help me with that, but what it began is to start to build the relationship, but it also began for other individuals to start getting data. What was the percentage of officer involvement in the community at that time, whether it was negative or whatever? And what I found out was very important was attacks on police officers were down 56%. So it wasn't just attacks on the community versus other communities, but it was also the way that the community started looking at police officers. So that right energy is important. When we have park directors who don't want any parts of it, they want the parks closed because they want to get off early and go home, then that's the wrong energy. When we have officers, and we would see this too, we would see the officers standing by the sides with their hands crossed because they're sitting there looking at Baby Shooter and Tiny Killer like, I want to arrest them, and their hands are tied because they couldn't. So we had to build relationships, and even though you see our community as these gang members, that's Miss Johnson's son. That's Mr. Rodriguez's boy right there. These are people who live in our communities, and no mother has ever given birth to a gang member. She always gave birth to a child. So when we start looking and humanizing the individuals that come out of our community, it makes it better for all of us.
Thank you very much, sir. Ms. Tremblay, did another of your panelists
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My name is Kevin Orange. I'm also known as Twin, and I oversee one of the GRID contracts in Southeast 1.
Good morning. Did you want to make a presentation, or you just want us to pepper you with questions?
No. Well, let me jump right in.
Okay.
When we say the partnership with community and law enforcement, I think the prime example is how our chief is now in Chicago being promoted to help them with their gangs out there. And now we have a chief here that's that's relatable to our community. I mean, because we invited them, because I'm also a board member for the California Ceasefire Committee. When Michael Moore came out there, and we had people from the community that wanted to come there. We had a successful meeting to where we didn't let nobody come there and be hostile to him, so he engaged in them. He heard what the community was talking about. They were talking about how the suppression of Metro comes into the community. And, you know, so he heard the concerns of the community, and he said, I'm going to change some of the policies. And he did that immediately and effectively to where they no longer come in the community where they pulling people over and jacking them up, putting them on the cars. They now over there just serving warrants and arrests. So that was a big move in the promise that he made to us that we seen immediately. And so with us being like the guinea pigs in this intervention world, how we start, I mean, it's new for us as well as law enforcement is building these relationships, because we broke the tradition of we don't talk to law enforcement, but somebody had to do it. And from our backgrounds, it was unorthodox for us to be in this position, but it was a spiritual being that got us here to where we had to start building a relationship with law enforcement, because there's no way we can go further in these communities on bringing peace without them being involved. As my brother Skip was up here speaking, and we probably one of the three that be in a community that don't even think about bringing peace and changing our community without law enforcement being involved, because at the beginning, for the last 40, 50 years, the trauma that plagued our communities, it plagued law enforcement as well. So it put us against each other when we shouldn't be against each other. We should be working with each other and discussing the trauma that we both had to endure with, you know, the community and law enforcement imposing on us, because they thought what they was doing was right and the community thought that what they was doing was wrong. But us sitting down at the table, we found that we all played a part in the relationships that we had in our communities. And with us noticing that, we understood that trauma played a major part in it. And when we was adolescent growing up, we didn't understand what trauma was. We just thought this was the normal thing to do. But us sitting down along with law enforcement, no, we all was broke. Everybody in that community was traumatized. And so in order for us to stop fighting each other, we had to talk about it and put it out on the plate. And Watts played a major part in that, because I mean, when they first started having that meeting with law enforcement, man, it was like very tense in there, you know, because they couldn't understand, if we make an arrest, why the community so upset with us? Because it's the perception that law enforcement, that they're the bad guys. But when you sit down and start talking to them, you find out some of them it's just like you. And it's just like with the gangs out there, you know, that was warm with each other for years. They had to find out when they sat down and talked with each other, we had the same things in common, that we all want peace. We just had different ways of getting there. But I mean, for the last 10 years of working around with law enforcement, I mean, it's welcoming that a captain can call me 2, 4 in the morning when I'm asleep to ask me, what do I think what he should do? And so I was like, man, I think you probably need to put some cars in this area, drive down the street without arresting no one. So just the presence of their cars being in certain places, it divert people from coming in doing crime, or somebody from going off and committing a crime. And just like, and now with the communication going on, we had a big funeral with the Roller 60s. They was coming into the community where I work in with the Hoovers, Detroit gangsters, their biggest enemies. So I got a call from another agency that's overseeing the grid, developing options. They gave me a phone call. I put a team together. I notified law enforcement what gangs are going to be there, and you know where will I need them situated at. So they came through, you know, make sure everything was right. But they don't get in there to make a disturbance. They come in there and add with the peace that we have going on. So the relationships have been building, and I don't see, and I just welcome that, seeing us building these relationships for the future. It can't do nothing but make our communities much better and much safer.
Thank you, sir. We greatly appreciate it. Commissioner Soboroff, did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm into quotes, and you guys, all three of you, have given some real gems today.
Yes.
And they're much appreciated, and they come from a place that only years of experience and feeling it and walking it can come from. You can't intellectualize when somebody says no mother gives birth to a gang member, she gives birth to a baby, and
yeah, that's it. Yeah.
And defining and defining halfway, which is I think a lesson for us as well, because we get tested sometimes. You saw a little bit this morning, but meeting halfway on a bridge is sometimes not so easy. You got to go all the way across and come back to the halfway point.
Right.
And I just want to thank you for what you've done in your lives to be able to have these kinds of gems of wisdom that we're going to take seriously. Much appreciated.
You know, it's just a spirit that overwhelmed us that we know it's our responsibility to do and make the change. I mean, this work is not made for everyone. It's not like we go out and get accepted in the beginning. We got called snitches, informants, and stuff like that, but it was the will of God that drove us to keep pushing, you know, because we know the outcomes will be much greater for the future that's coming. Because I also sit at some of the trainings where we train in law enforcement for the last 4 years. And so the beginning of the trainings, we get in there, it'd be kind of awkward because they don't know what to expect. We sitting over there, but when we get engaged in a conversation and, you know, interacting with each other, at the end of the trainings, they have a different outlook on what it is we do and who we are as a person, as well as us building up relationships with them as well. And one thing that we're doing so good with the city, you got the county, the sheriffs, which need to catch up with LAPD. Now you done create a model where they anxious to get into this type of work and build a relationship with the community, with the sheriff department. So it's something that we done created that's a good model. I mean, we got Chief Beck in Chicago now. And we got a chief in San Francisco. That says a lot about what LA is doing. You know, the community, I mean, the relationships that we're building down here, you can't put a price on that.
Do you see that gang members today want different things for their kids than they had for themselves? I noticed many times you would see gang members, registered gang members and leaders, once they take their child and they're out there coaching them
Yes.
at a park instead of creating havoc at a park. Do you see that continue today?
Not like it was back in the days, because it's like when you don't talk about things, you just let things fester. But when you can intercept someone and tell them, do you understand what you're doing? You know, look at your son, look at the child. So there was no one to really talk to us and hold our hand and guide us and tell us what we was doing.
Exactly.
And really meant it, and that was out there standing with us, not you was coming from somewhere miles away to come talk to me once a week. You was present every day, and that's why the importance of safe passage, it put us right in the middle of the pain and the trauma that these kids are suffering. Because if you out there in front of these schools on the corners, you know exactly what person, father or mother, just got killed or died or got sent to jail. It's easy for us to have a conversation with them and let them know that we are here with you. Even to give law enforcement a different outlook, because most of us that came through a lifestyle of gangs, most of our kids is going to criminal justice. I have 2 daughters in college going to criminal justice. I have one trying to get in law enforcement, because the only way you can be about to change.
Better be here.
Yes.
All right.
Yes,
Right,
it's
Chief?
here. Yes.
We want 'em here.
So we don't talk the negative talk to them, you know, because everybody growing up wanted to be a law enforcement. Then there was some point in time where that wasn't talked about. It was like, stay away from, but no. I encourage them to get back into law enforcement, because I know within the next 6 years, we have I think about 600 to 900 African-American men and women that's going to be retiring from law enforcement. So we got to put something in place to start getting these kids back into law enforcement.
That's right. Thank you.
Sir, thank you for your
You're welcome.
presentation. I do have one question
Okay.
for you, and I appreciate the history and all of your comments today. What can we do better? What can the department do better? What's in the next 5 years? What would you like to see the department doing in terms of improving this program further?
Us having a seat at the table, like the Skips, the Townsend, even Ann and Reggie, they have a good idea of what it is we want, but I think us having a seat at the table, we'll make any decision along with everybody that's here, I think we can get along much further.
Anything else?
No, I'm just happy to be here, you know, because I have a son that's in the hospital for the last 3 days. He's having high blood pressure. He's only 15 years old, but that was my concern. But it was important for me to make this meeting this morning to share with you, you know, about the work we've been doing in the community and how far we've done grown.
We thank you for your dedication and the effort to get here. It's very meaningful for us to hear from you, so thank you very much, sir. Chief, did you want to say something?
No, just Twin, I appreciate you being here, and our prayers with your son and his full recovery, and to Fernando and Skip both as well, your partners, collaboration we're genuinely working and pulling in the same direction, and the grid effort only continues to mature and grow, and this is something that, as each of you have mentioned, is spreading across the country, and yet we have so much work here yet still to do. With the impact of gang violence here in Los Angeles. What could Los Angeles be with 0 gang-related homicides?
Yes.
It would be, and we all hope and strive to get there.
Yes.
Thank your
And-
son for letting you stop by.
And we'll continue to be interested in your ideas and recommendations as we move forward.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very
All right.
much, sir. Thank you. We now have scheduled a number of the community members from the Community Safety Partnership at Harvard Park, Watts Gang Task Force, the CPAP program, and Centinela Youth Services. I understand there are only 2 chairs up there, but if the 4 representatives of those groups who will be speaking, if you could come forward, and we'll just hear all 4 presentations before we ask for questions, if you don't mind. I see Sir from the Watts Gang, Donnie, come on up, and please have a seat. Good morning. Good morning.
Okay, good
Please-
morning.
Good morning. Please introduce yourselves, and then we'd very much love to hear from you, sir.
Okay, my name is Donnie Jubert. Grew up in Nickerson, the biggest development, vice president of the Watts Gang Task Force.
And I am Ellen Pace. I'm a member of the Central Area Neighborhood Development Council, but I'm also a resident of Harvard Park. And I'm really excited to be here to talk about the positive things that are going on in Harvard Park, and I appreciate you having me here.
Excellent. Sir.
So if I could start off, I'm one of the pilots of CHP. I was brought on with Housing Authority, which is Hackler. I was also one of the founders the Truce in 1992. And I knew then we never had a relationship when it came to law enforcement. And so in 2005, we had 7 young men was murdered within 2 months. And we couldn't understand that it wasn't on the news, wasn't talked about. And at that time, Janice Hine was the councilman person in our community. And so we went looking for her. And when we found Janet, we was very upset, very angry about the things that took place in our community, and they didn't care. That's what we felt like. And so Janet decided to have a Monday meeting that she was going to meet with the community. Then she come walking in the door with law enforcement. We was upset because why would you bring law enforcement in here and we talking to you about what's taking place in the community? As you know, the Watts Gang Task Force has been existing going on 12, 13 years. During that time, Housing Authority decided that we wanted to create CHP, law enforcement. And what I would have loved for those folks that was in here doing all that yelling and screaming, you have to be engaged. You have to want best for your community. Also, you have to be from the community. One thing they are correct on, how you engage the community with dealing with law enforcement. And so we came up with 1 week training with LAPD and us, which is the community. And there was folks at that table did not want to sit across from law enforcement. But as we went through the whole week, the Friday we all graduated together with law enforcement. We brought CHP to Nickerson. And you talking about was it rough? Everything them guys said to you was the truth. But we believed that we had to get the community engaged in doing this. Remember, I grew up in the notorious community, a gang that was bigger than normal gangs. And I had to go against that to create this piece with law enforcement. And we had a great team doing that. Because of Janet, Field Tingeritas, and Amada, we met every week. I remember a 5-year-old kid, and I'm really excited about this program. This program, what folks don't understand, is the best program we ever had, and I think it's the best. If you look around, there's nowhere else in Watts the way it is in Watts. But I had a 5-year-old kid, I'm looking outside the rec center, and he was leaning up against the police car. And I watched that dad walk out the gym, and when he went off on that baby, I mean, I felt so bad, but I also had to talk to the dad, and I said, why? Man, I don't care nothing about the police. You know what they done to us and this and that. I said, but this is a 5-year-old kid, and you just turned his life around yourself. At that time, I was talking to CHP that what we didn't have in Watts for almost 20-something years was football. And they took that away from our community, so the kids really didn't have too many places to go. So myself and LAPD created a team they was called Watts Bears for a minute. Now they call Watts Rams because the Rams adopted them. But that was a group of officers that dedicated their heart to that program. Maybe a month later, that same dad signed his kid up to the football, and that relationship built. Also, what we've done that was a little different than most communities, we started playing basketball against law enforcement. We building that relationship. We had to find a way to do it a way that our community was being engaged and being involved. And we had young gang members that was on teams playing against law enforcement. It built a relationship that no one understood. Even the officers that couldn't have a relationship or talk to the young men was finding themselves having conversation with them in the same locker room dressing. We had officers that would come with their family to the Nickerson Guard, introducing them to programs, to toy giveaways, things that we was doing in the community. Let me tell you something about this program. It's huge. And I would think every city should have this program. I was one of the young men that went to meet with Harvard Park over at with the Bombers to tell them about the program in Nickerson. And when I told the Bombers that you need to support this and stand behind something like this, because it changed the lives in our community. Our senior citizens in Nickerson Garden was able to go to grocery stores, wasn't able to worry about bullets being flying like they was in 2005. The crime in Nickerson down now 89%. This is the biggest development, and it's because the relationship that we have with law enforcement. One thing I would tell a lot of folks, even them folks right there, I would have loved to took them to some of the roll calls that we did. We created Heart to Heart at Southeast Station, where community folks like us went in to know how many people, how many African Americans, how many whites, how many Asians is working in our station. We wanted to be engaged that way, and we met every Wednesday. And I'm telling you, I'm proud of this program. And when Moore came in, the chief, he said, look, Donnie, we're not going to make no changes. But he did. But we stood by him. We understood that him coming in fresh, we want him to understand what this program means to this community. And he joined right in. Like Skip and all of them said, we're proud of this program. And when we got folks that's shouting and yelling, don't have a clue about this program. Yes, we had young men lost their lives by officers. But how do we better ourselves on the young men that maybe lost their life, that maybe had kids? How do we make sure they don't lose their life? And it's by building this type of relationship. And it starts with us. It starts with the community. And so I would engage and invite them people. I wish they wouldn't have left. They need to come to the Watts Gang Task Force. They need to see how we sit in the room every Monday and deal with crime and homicides. And we haven't had a homicide in Watts in a long time. And it's due to the relationship and the work. And I'm proud, happy to be here today to talk about this type of program. It needs to be in every community. They need to find a way to continue to fund this, and whatever we could do in Watts to help this program grow even more, count us in. Thank you.
Thank you. Ma'am.
I have different perspective. I live across the street from Harvard Park. Prior to the CSP coming to the park, I wouldn't set foot in the park because I was afraid. It's a beautiful park, a park that has all the amenities that any park can offer. It's really a beautiful park. Since the CSP has gotten there, it's a park now where it's thriving. It's community, people, children. Everybody is out because they're comfortable now being at the park, and as well as I am. It was a park that was, you guys know the stories about the homicides, the gangs, it just wasn't a good place. But at this time, I'm a proud member of the community. I often refer to it now as Mayberry, because, no, seriously, because we all know each other, the officers, the community, the adults, the children. The children actually adore these police officers. You can see the joy in their faces when they encounter them. And just like some of the panelists said before, that is the greatest and the long-term benefit of this program, because we have children that changes the relationship that we have with our policing. And any opportunity that I get to talk about Harvard Park, to shine a positive light on it, is now my mission in life. I don't think it's fair that I had to jump in my car to drive to parks in other communities to go and do my walk around the park every day. I now am a part of the community. Before, I didn't consider myself part of the community. I kind of isolated myself because of the danger that I felt. But now, as I said before, I'm a proud resident of Harvard Park, and I invite you all to come out and just feel it. It's more than just the way it looks. It's a feel now. It's a feeling of safety. It's a feeling of joy. It's a feeling of just seeing the kids play, the parents with the kids, the people walking their dogs. It's a real community now, and I'm just glad to be a part of it. We're going into our third year now, and one of the issues that I have, and it was brought up before, is how do we keep it going? How, after the 5-year grant is over, do we sustain it? Do we keep this going? I would hate for us to go backward. I know it is a partnership, so it does involve the community, and that is one of the reasons why I make sure that I'm at all the meetings. We do a walk with the police on the second and fourth Saturdays of the month, where we just go out and walk around the park. And in doing that, we have gotten to know the officers. They know us as well. And as I said, you know, they drive down the street, we're waving, hey, Clem, Del Pino, and they say, hey, Ms. Pace. It's just no, really, it's just a joy. I had no clue what it was before they came and invited me to become a part of it. And I can say that it's one of the best things that I've done because it affects my way of life. I can now enjoy my community. I don't have to get in the car and drive over to, the west side or someplace because it's so-called better than where I am. I think it's just a great community to be a part of. And I do invite you guys to come out and feel it, because it is a feeling and not just a visual. You have to feel it.
Well, thank you both for your presentations about the CSP program and the great impact it has had. One of my questions for you is going to be, what can we do to improve the program, make it better, take this to the next level? And I think perhaps you've already answered my question, but I want to check. And I think you talked about bringing it to every community, funding it appropriately. And Ms. Pace, I think you spoke about ensuring we can sustain it. And those are obviously critically important programs given your, and recommendations given your experience with it. But I want to be sure if there's anything else about the program that you think we could improve, that the department could improve, we certainly are welcome to hearing that as well, if there's anything else.
We have to keep this program. and to be honest with you, I think if you guys continue to listen to the community, but get real community folks. A lot of times people could shout, but if I don't see you out here in the streets dealing with the things that we deal with, a lot of times they politicking for something else. But this program is very important, that we take it all the way to the White House, which we had folks from law enforcement went to the White House based on this program, based on relationship that we have, is used to continue these young people. Also, what we have done with Southeast, when we went to roll call, we was able to sit down with young officers before they even hit the streets. And having conversation with them, you'd be amazed. A lot of them grew up in communities. A lot of them had family members that was gang members. But what we helped them understand is coming into the streets, they got a chance to know who we are. They got a chance to know once they riding in the cars, they see us, the relationship starts. Now we got to get the community engaged, involved, and understanding where these young officers are coming from and understanding what the importance is the community. And the way we did it to start off CHP, that's how it was able to grow, because we engaged with the community. We allowed them to come to these meetings, to come be a part of bringing this peace. And one thing I did say about Harvard Park when we met with the bombers, it was just a few of us in there. I say, listen, to make this work, you got to get the community engaged. You got to get them involved. And you'll be amazed on, just like ma'am just said, a lot of the residents that lived there was too afraid to walk in their own park, was scared to even go and exercise when it's right across the street. She had to go elsewhere to pay. But because of this program, you've seen it did a whole change for the community. So you guys have to continue to fight for a program like this. Use us to help fight for the program. We love this program, and we got to keep it in these communities, because anytime crime drops the way it dropped in our community, that's huge. If you look at the stats, every week we have the best stats almost, and we're in Watts. And so we are proud, happy, love this piece, and Scott and them know a lot of us is dedicated to it. Yeah, we took abuses early on, but we knew what was best for the community. We knew what we wanted for the community. So, and a lot of officers right now that's out there trying to build relationships. Yes, do we still have work to do? Yes, because you still have young officers coming in. They have different views, different ideas. Right now, we got midnight basketball going in Nickerson with an LAPD team in the league. See, that's what people don't understand. You put these type of things in the community. Yeah, we had folks yelling from the bleachers, yelling at the police, but you had the police talking back to them, but building a relationship. And after the game was over, them officers is out shaking hands, talking to community people, and that's how you stay engaged.
Whatever training that is taking place right now as far as the selection and placement of these officers in the community is key, because it is about relationships, and relationships are people interacting with people. So whatever those trainings are, they need to continue, and the selection process is also key, because I don't think Harvard Park CSP would be as successful as it is without those officers that are in the community. They are committed to the community. One example that I noted is that they care about the appearance of the community. I have noticed I kind of have a distinct vantage point in that I live in a two-story building on a very active corner, so I can see what they're doing and how they interact. That they make those 311 service requests for cleanups. They actually roll up their sleeves and paint out the graffiti. They have actually gone into the community of one of our distinguished community members and cleaned his yard. I mean, it was in total disarray, and a few hours later, it was perfectly landscaped. So those are the kind of things that I don't know how we select them or how we find them, but those are the kind of officers that we have at Harvard Park CSP right now. So whatever the training is and the process for the selection is, it needs to definitely continue.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions?
I really just want to thank you both for being here, and I have been out to Harvard Park and got to meet you and some of the officers and gang intervention workers, and you're exactly right that you can just feel it I felt it when I went there, and the joy and the sense of safety and the ownership that the community members have of the park and of their own community. And I certainly appreciate both your feedback about how we can expand and do better, and also, of course, love to hear how well our officers are doing at Harvard Park and other CSP areas, but also just want to thank you for taking matters into your own hands and taking leadership and independently of the department and doing your part to bring folks together to hold the department accountable and to engage community members in this process and building trust and safety. So I just appreciate so much what you've done.
Sure.
Ms. Pace, wherever you are, is on its way to Mayberry. That's very clear to me. Thank you very much for what you're doing and how you're doing it. It's infectious, and Donnie, I mean, you're a legend, man. I mean, you had your fingerprints on some of the greatest things that have ever happened in our community and relationships with law enforcement for a long time. And I hope that both of you will go spread your message and give your speeches as many times as you can, because it's extremely impactful. It comes from such a great place. It's just it's an honor for you to come here and share it with us. And please keep doing that. One more thing. You're worried about your pilot. The best thing that anyone can do to get a pilot made permanent is not worry about the pilot being permanent. It's worry that the pilot works. And that's exactly what you're doing. You keep on doing what you're doing, and that pilot will, there's too much to lose. You're doing it perfectly.
Commissioners, I just want to echo your remarks of appreciation for both of you, Ms. Pace, Donnie. Your leadership here today by being a voice of the communities in which community safety partnerships have been origined and have grown into, speaks volumes on behalf of the larger community. So you are truly being the guardian of those communities, the servants to those communities. And when we talk about collaborative partnerships, this is the absolute essence of the whole of a community working together. A couple points is rest assured that the Executive Steering Committee, under the leadership of Gerald Woodyard, also with the partnership of Deputy Chief, now retired Deputy Chief Phil Tangarides, Mrs. Connie Rice, and others, are coming together to allow this system of community safety partnerships in both housing developments as well as neighborhoods such as Harvard Park and South Park to really go to scale. This is a commitment I made as chief with my appointment a little over a year ago. But what we have found is that this is a program as it has grown and matured, that needs structure, that it needs systems to reinforce its makeup. And while it stays unique to each of the communities in which it serves, it does have selection criteria and training and investments that how does it perpetuate? It's just not on a natural, it's not a natural path. Lastly though, this is all being done with the recognition that this needs to become grow beyond a public-private partnership to being a public-supported effort. And that's where the Housing Authority, certainly within the developments, will continue that. That's not a pilot. This is something that we look to expand with San Fernando Gardens being the next site here in this February. But in Harvard Park and South Park, which we see only through the generosity of the Bomber Group have we been able to initiate such an investment. But this next budget year, budget that will be before this commission here in about 2 weeks, will have as a priority the adoption of Harvard Park as a funded matter by the City of Los Angeles and transitioning from what is a pilot by philanthropic communities into what is a public obligation. Ms. Tremblay had to leave, but the department intends to fully follow the model that we saw with the introduction of gang reduction youth development as a cultural shift that previously 20 years ago was largely, 15 years ago, largely funded by private organizations and nonprofits that transitioned into a public enterprise. And that's really where the growth was able to become much more sustainable and significant. So we intend to do the same with the Community Safety Partnership. We look forward to the sophomore report, if you will, the report of our sophomore years of Community Safety Partnership. What can we learn? What are our strengths, but what are areas we need to improve? But I know this is a listening session, but I want to cap a few remarks about this because this is such a critical aspect of our evolution of community policing in Los Angeles. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you both very much for coming today and for sharing incredibly important and powerful information for us for the CSP program. I'll say, just to slightly refine what the Chief said, I think we're hearing the budget next week, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Tiefenk, isn't that right? Next week. And we'll be hearing the proposal from the department. Of course, the budget doesn't stop with us, then it goes to City Council, and I encourage you and everyone in the community to be engaged in that process to ensure that it gets funding. And finally, I'd like to just do a brief thank you to the Watts Gang Task Force for, as I understand, in the future, we've been engaging in conversations about co-hosting a meeting of this commission in the community. I'd like to thank you for that effort to ensure we hear a lot of different voices. So we look forward to that. Thank you both for your time today very much. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, too, for graciously waiting, if you wouldn't mind coming to the podium so we can hear from Centinela Youth Services and, of course, the CPAP program. Sir. Please, yes. Yes. We'll hear both of your statements and then pepper you with questions as our practice.
Hello, Commissioners. Hello, Chief. Thank you for having us here. My name is Jessica Ellis. I'm Executive Director at Centinela Youth Services, and I also would like to acknowledge my colleague, Terry Robinson, is our Justice Transformation Specialist. So Sentinel Youth Services has specialized in diversion for over 45 years. And it's our true hope to put that part of our work out of business, and I'll talk about that in a second. We were started actually by some officers in the Inglewood Police Department in 1973 who on their own felt, I don't want to arrest kids, I want to connect them to support and services, and on their own started connecting kids into after-school programs or counseling in place of arresting them. And then through community leaders, a group of parents, et cetera, formed our agency. And so for 45 years, we've been working on keeping kids out of the justice system. What has been exciting in our partnership with LAPD, which started about 8-9 years ago, was the idea of pre-booking diversion. And what that means is for kids facing a misdemeanor or a felony, LAPD worked with us to rewrite their internal arrest procedures with kids so that the arrest is not completed, there's no booking number, and the child is not logged in the statewide database of arrests, so they're not within view of any other agency for having been picked up by law enforcement. And when they complete our program, the arrest is never completed, and they can legally say they were not arrested. And that was the first of its kind in California at the range of offenses that your department worked with us on. So we're working with almost the full range of felonies with a few very violent, serious exceptions. And with the data and the success of really reducing recidivism, your department worked with us to extend that on to kids that are even facing maybe a third offense. And the other piece that I really want to commend the department in working with us on recently is being very cautious about the concept of diversion. So when a child is diverted, you still have this potential consequences hanging over your head. Our services are voluntary, but if they don't choose to participate, they could go back and could potentially face that arrest being filed on to the court system. But in the interest of working to further decriminalize based on what research says works for kids and really what's appropriate for public safety, we really need to work towards more things being decriminalized. And so your department has worked with us to separate referral forms for kids under status offenses. Those are things that are only illegal because you're under 18. And really decriminalize those and send kids to services for us that are completely voluntary, and your department does not get reporting back if they succeed or don't succeed in that. So this is really starting to chip away at our over-criminalization of what is often just normal teenage behavior. Teenagers do dumb, risky things as a developmental stage. And there's a lot of other communities for which kids get counseling or support and don't have to face law enforcement involvement. So we really are, in LA, we've gotten to a point of over-policing our kids, and that's not necessarily even the fault of law enforcement. You get called on a lot by the community, by schools in particular, to handle things that really could be more of a disciplined, community-based situation. And in our program, we work to put justice back into the hands of the community. So when you divert it, it's not just up to us and our paid staff. We involve volunteers from the community who get trained as mediators. They go through over 40 hours of intensive training with us, a certification course, and they can facilitate a restorative justice session between that young person and the person that they harmed, so the victim of the crime. And that process itself has been incredibly powerful in one, in helping to build empathy in the teen brain, that our behaviors do impact other people, and really provide healing and a space and a say in the matter with the person who was harmed. And it also helps that process brings a better sense of justice. In our court system, the madder a victim is, really all they have to ask for is money. So the more mad you are, the more money you ask for. Well, you can only get blood out of a tournament if the family doesn't have any money. And so then the victim can be left even more disgruntled and upset and harmed again by not having any real resolution. So I want to share a quick story about an example of that with us. We had a kid who had done some tremendous damage at a school site. He had been a former student there. He had younger siblings still there. He spray painted obscenities all over the elementary school campus. The principal was so mad, he didn't at first want to even participate in our process unless we could guarantee him he was going to get money out of it. And we can't guarantee. It's an opportunity for you to come, have a say in it. The kid's going to offer up what they think they can do to make things right. You can agree if that's acceptable to you or not. You don't have to agree to anything, but we can't pre-promise anything. We got to the meeting, and he would not even look at the child. He had his laptop up, and he was just flipping through the photos of what the damage, just to feed his fuel. And but through that process, the mediators asked the kid, you know, a lot of the obscenities were against the teachers. And so they asked him, well, you went to this school. What was your experience with the teachers? And his mom turned to him and said, tell them. And the kid said, well, actually, Miss Baca bought me shoes when my dad went to prison. And she helped get me clothes for school and school supplies. And then the kid started crying, and finally the principal looked up into this kid's face for the first time and came to his own place of empathy for where this kid had come from and where his anger had come from. And even though he had told us prior to the mediation, I don't want that kid back on my campus, community service is not an option, it's money or nothing else, they ended with an agreement to do community service where the principal would mentor the kid. They were both into art, and they connected on it and did a whole art project on the campus during the summer. So, and he didn't get a dime. But they got real, true healing and true reconciliation. And so that's what's available through this process that our court process just isn't set up to facilitate. And through that, this child also doesn't have a record to follow him forever either. So we're in 13 of your 21 divisions, and we are diverting well over 300 kids a year from LAPD at this point. And the stats have been holding wonderfully. 87% of our kids who meet with their victim complete successfully everything that they promised to the victim. Our kids in general, in their full service plan of whatever we're working with them to get back on track, are completing it 78%. And our kids with higher risk, higher needs, a lot of other things going on, maybe some gang involvement, et cetera, are completing it 72%. So it's been a really strong partnership, and our victim satisfaction rate is 98%, and our kids rate the process as fair and equitable at 96%. So they're finding that, you know, it really feels fair for them. But a big part of that process is training for law enforcement. So there are a lot of misconceptions about where teenage behavior comes from. So we do a lot of work with your teams to help educate them on the teen brain and trauma and its impacts on behavior and what actually works to change behavior, because our punitive methods they don't work, and they make behavior worse. And we can see when that training has really made an impact when your officers start coming to us and telling us who's calling them the most, which schools are calling the police on for the most small minor behaviors, et cetera. And so that's really extended our work further into schools and districts to work on the overuse of police. And I think that's where there's really an opportunity for this department to take some leadership in the community as well. What our kids really need, not so much diversion, they need front-end investment in resources and opportunities and robust youth development in the community and safe communities where kids can thrive and find their skills and their talents naturally and not be left to sometimes their own devices with lack of supervision or lack of constructive things to do, or getting negative messages, which is something we see a lot, that are hampering their own vision of what their potential could be. And so if our kids are getting really thriving, positive youth development, then there should be less of a need for diversion. Teenagers being what they are, there will always be some of that. But even that, I was speaking to a classroom of young people at USC, and this particular classroom was a summer course. They were very diverse ethnically, but they were not diverse economically. They were all coming from elite schools from across the country and boarding schools abroad. And we got to talking about the kinds of things that we see kids arrested for in schools, and their jaws were dropping. Like, what? And I asked them, well, what do you do with kids in your school if they get caught trying to sell a little bit of weed? Or, we went through various scenarios, and none of them could think of a single kid in their school that had been arrested, because they're paying money to go to that school. And they have parents that can advocate. And so different approaches are taken. They get counseling, they get other kinds of services and interventions. And so we really want to look at the inequities in our systems and how can we give the same to our kids in LA whose families might not have the same advocacy resources. So I'll leave you with one last story. We worked with Southeast Division. They had a group of girls that had been robbing people of cell phones. And victims didn't want to come through. They didn't want to testify. And law enforcement didn't even want to go that far of really arresting the girls. So we worked together, reached out to their families, helped inform the families of what was going on. And two of the girls, there were 6 girls involved. 2 of them ended up enrolling in our program, although the robberies stopped, even though we only got 2 of them. And the 2 both had siblings that had spent time in prison and had some gang affiliation. But both girls ended up from one of them cursing out our case manager because she was just really angry and had been in a lot of pain, to working through that. And both girls ended up with, one started her own business and went into LA Trade Tech, and the other one was going into Southwest College and finished high school. When we first talked to her, she didn't even think she could finish high school. So really a lot of this is just getting in there with the right supports in time. And I also really want to commend GRID. They've been a fabulous partner to work with us when you're referring us kids that are gang involved or trying to get out. We work with GRID, incredible messengers to help partner on that. So thank you, and I hope you can do some more advocacy around youth development. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Why don't we hear the other presentation first? Yes, thank you, sir.
As Assistant Chief Arcos mentioned earlier, the CPAB, Community Police Advisory Board, was formed about 30 years ago as a result of a lot of misinformation. I'm sorry.
Didn't mean to, would you state your name and?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, it's Bruce Remick.
Just so we have a good record for this.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Bruce Remick. I am now the co-chair of West Bureau CPAB. So, as I was saying, the genesis was about 30 years ago, and basically CPAB had remained untouched. There were a few little tweaks in between, but when Chief Moore came in, he said, okay, let's get this thing going in the right direction, because the CPAB meetings were quite honestly becoming coffee clutches where people would come and they'd get some food, they'd get some coffee, and they'd bitch and talk to each other, but nothing would ever get done. So the chief asked Assistant Chief Arcos to revise CPAB. And there were 4 of us on the committee. We started, believe it or not, Chief, a year ago on this. And it was finally implemented in the spring of this year. And what the basic changes were is that everybody was fired from CPAB. They were completely dissolved, and the captain was allowed now to bring the CPAB together with involved community members. So in the interview process, each person for CPAB in each of the 21 divisions is interviewed by the captain and by the co-chair. There's a citizen co-chair along with every captain. And I happen to be, there's also for each bureau a citizen co-chair, of which I am for West Bureau with Deputy Chief Eisenberg. And so as a result of this, we put in a lot of time and effort making bylaws, making CPAB strong, making the committees strong, making the membership strong. We've kind of made it not a mandate, but it's become a mandate that every person who comes to CPAB is going to bring something with them. They're going to go on a committee. They're going to go on an outreach committee, or they're going to go on a traffic committee. They're actually going to be asked to do some work, which was not the case with the previous CPABs. So as a result, we've rolled this out in the spring of this year to all the command staff. We had close to 300 people, I think, Chief. We did interviews, we did talk, we had workshops, and so I think now we're really seeing CPABs being very, very productive. At least from West Bureau side, where of course I'm more heavily involved, I'm hearing from the captains of the West Bureau. I would say about every 2 or 3 weeks I hear from one of them. They say, hey, we need some help with this project, or we need some help with this. What do you suggest we do? And we're also planning a CPAB summit, I believe, coming up next year for citywide CPAB. So a lot has changed. The basic structure is there. The idea is to be able to have the citizens involved directly with the captains of the divisions and are able to talk about their problems and so forth. So that's my overview.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, both of you, for coming today and presenting. It's very important for us to hear about your experiences and particularly the recent changes. But I'm going to pose to you the same question I've posed to most of the speakers today. What's the next step? What's the next level? How do we assist you in making these programs even better? What can the department do? And certainly with respect to the youth diversion programs, the obvious question is how do we get it into all 21 divisions other than funding the programs more robustly? But if I could ask both of you and where do you see these programs next 5 years? How do we get better? What's the next step?
Well, quite honestly, I think that we are on the right steps for CPAB. As I said, it's been completely revised. The program is going, it's very robust. I'm hearing very good things from the captains of the divisions. So I cannot say I need anything more except the support, which I'm already getting. I'm getting terrific support from headquarters, and we're not a money organization, so we don't need money, although it would be nice to have a little bit of money for a coffee once in a while. We keep asking people to donate or donate sandwiches or whatever. So, I mean, if I had to say, if anything, financial support would be nice, but that's not a necessity. That's just a kind of a minor thing. But it's going very well. It's going extremely well.
Thank you, sir.
She wants money.
Ms. Ellis?
Yeah, I think aside from funding, although I think that's a big part of it, it's not just for us, there's other agencies that can do this work as well, and having a robust funding structure for that. And I think there does need to be a conversation on that at one point, because also the way you structure the funding is important and can either get good outcomes for kids or bad outcomes for kids. So you can structure funding in such a way where there's a perverse incentive to serve lower risk kids, or you can structure the funding so that it's done properly and you can give the right dosage to the right kid. So that's a whole area that I see often not enough attention is given to, so I would love to see at some point a robust discussion on that. On other ways, I think partnering together through more robust data collection and research, I would love to see and this is with caution, because I also think it's a really important part of diversion and its protections are limiting certain data points from law enforcement's view. And I think that's an important point that's been reinforced by the broader research for best practices for kids' futures. But I still think that there could be a way to bring a robust data partner in who's neutral to really look at comparison studies between kids going through community-based diversion or going through the normal justice track. There's an interesting study that a single arrest even if the kid is not convicted, just the arrest itself makes the kid 7 times more likely to drop out of school, end up on public assistance. So what is it about that contact? And I don't know that we've done enough research to really look at that. I know for us, we see a lot of impact on labeling. So kids being seen as the bad kid. And so when law enforcement is called to the school site, for example, that kid is now labeled the bad kid. In their own mind is where it's the most dangerous. And we can see that in their thinking when we're working with them, and it can get in the way of even their seeing the potential to move on to other things. I think also there's still some more work to do to work together on buy-in. Maybe there's some additional things that could be done in front-end training of officers to better understand kids and their development, potentially considering officers that specialize in youth. You're a large enough department to maybe be able to consider that, that might specialize in that for their career. I know that one of our big problems in juvenile justice for a long time is rookie, either rookie cops, rookie probation officers, rookie attorneys get put on the kids when our kids probably need our best because that's our future. And so I don't know what the current practice of that is in LAPD right now, but that's something to think about if we can have folks that really specialize and if that's an exalted position of some sort, because our kids deserve that. But yeah, I think it really does mostly come down to funding. There are amazing organizations that stand ready to divert kids out, and it really is that the investment has not been there. We have primarily, LAPD hasn't provided any funding to our organization. We've been serving for 8 years. We've done it all self-funded through getting our own competitive grants through the state and the county and philanthropy. And there's really been little even support to back behind that. So even just the backing and the advocacy to make sure that funding is brought to this would help a lot. And I know with the new county effort towards diversion, that's going to help. But it's, it's rolling out at county pace. There's other opportunities through the state to maybe bring resources quicker. So.
Thank you. That was very helpful. Thank you both again before I turn it over to my colleagues for your time today. And Mr. Remick, I would say, and I neglected to mention this earlier, I was at the CPAP Summit earlier this year, got to see the energy in the room and the dedication of many people in the community to working towards helping the department get better and working towards making their community safer. So that was very invigorating. So thank you for being here as well. Commissioners, questions?
Thank you both so much for being here. Jessica, I'm a huge fan of your work, as you know, and of pre-arrest diversion in general, and really appreciate the department's leadership in incorporating it into now 20 of its 21 divisions, is that right? And exerting a lot of leadership with the county process and the state to make sure that additional resources are available, slow and inadequate as they may be. And I just appreciate everything you shared. It's all beautiful and so helpful. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, you talked about the importance of decriminalizing status offenses, which is critical, but would love your wisdom on how far can we go in terms of using pre-arrest diversion for more serious offenses? Under what circumstances is it actually effective? And also your reflections on incorporating a racial equity lens here, and how do we make sure that racial disparities are not reproduced in a pre-arrest diversion system, but that we're actually doing it in a way that results in racial equity?
In terms of going to more serious offenses, so we have successfully diverted, for example, home burglaries, assaults with injuries, hit and run with serious injuries. I think a key part of that, Annie Casey Foundation has done a lot of research, and so have several other organizations looking at youth crime and what works. And they've come to, based on a review of the research, they've come to a stance of believing in what they call no-fault diversion, meaning just keep diverting kids. Because the research is showing that what the justice system is doing in terms of when kids are incarcerated or even when they're put on probation supervision, none of that is in alignment with youth development and what works for kids. And it tends to make things worse. And the data just keeps showing it over and over and over again. But our systems are addicted to seeing the only solution is, if we want to make sure there's still consequences on the back end of diversion. So there's still this misconception that diversion itself does not include consequences. It includes consequences, but they're more meaningful consequences that the child is engaged in a way that's consistent with youth development, if it's done well. So if we're using evidence-based diversion practices, that's always going to work better than the justice system at this point in terms of the way it's set up. But that's can be, I understand, a scary proposition of the idea, and how is law enforcement going to be seen by members of the community that have been victimized if it feels like, well, this kid just keeps getting out to something in the community. So there's something psychological about, oh, we prosecuted them in court. But if we really hold our courts accountable and put out our stats from our court outcomes, which we don't put out. Nonprofits in the community are asked to put out all their stats on their effectiveness, but we don't hold probation in the court system to the same standards. So if we put all those stats out collectively, then we can have an honest conversation about what's really working or not. And so then I think there's some more robust partnerships that could be helpful when you have a child who really is of a physical harm to someone else. There can be community-based solutions to that with credible messengers, like folks from GRID who are right there in the community, know that kid, know what they're engaged in. It can be working with that parent on a day-to-day basis to contain the potential threat while services are being put in place to get that kid into a healthier place. So there can be other kinds of solutions or other kinds of even potential residential treatment centers that are not set up in the same command and punishment structures that probation has traditionally been structured in. So I do think there are ways to do that so that we can safely address more serious offenses outside of a adjudication process. And the racial equity lens is critical throughout all of this. We have in our agency, I don't want to scare you, we don't go to the public with it, it's just for our own purposes and for training purposes. But we have a collection of what we call reports of shame. And these are either police reports or school discipline reports where there is clear bias or a clear civil rights violation, et cetera. We go through proper chain of command on those on an individual basis, and we'll go to the deputy chief or somebody and say, maybe you need to make this one go away for this kid. And then we use it in training, and we don't attach your agency's name to it. And don't worry, most in the collection are actually from different agencies. But 90% of those in our collection are against African American kids. So the bias that we see is alive and well in terms of, like our favorite example is a kid who is expelled or in the process of expulsion, and we were able to interrupt it for sexual assault is what they were going to put on this child's record. He was 12 years old. He was twerking at the school dance where they were playing the twerking song. This is not sexual assault. And had we not intervened, that would have headed out through and on his record, and he was both arrested and put into the expulsion process. So we have had to have in our system an advocacy portion. We can't just off the presses take the referral. When we look at them, if we see a real violation, we have to go back and advocate. So you also don't want just automatic check the boxes diversion process that doesn't have protections in place for kids. And a big part of where we're having that discussion right now at our we host a collaborative roundtable of law enforcement to which LAPD very heavily attends. Thank you. And so our various law enforcement partners, the prosecutor's office, defense office, and other children's rights advocacy groups. And we're right now looking at case studies where an adult is actively pushing a kid into the justice system inappropriately, and talking about how can we as a community have different solutions, and how can we hold adults more accountable. It's not just about protecting kids, but how do we hold the adults accountable that that's not, that their behavior is harming this child. And so that led to some really robust discussions. We did have someone in the group say, I can't believe we're talking about holding adults accountable. But as a society, we really need to hold ourselves to a higher standard to protect our children. And a big part of that is the equity issues. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Soboroff, do you have any questions?
Very well. Thank you both for what you're doing. And I know that the philanthropic community has long organization does.
Thank you. Chief, anything?
I just want to thank both of you for attending and participating. So it's been a long morning or early afternoon, so thank you for your patience with this. We have a couple more presenters, just so you know that you're not last. But both of your programs are important to us for just what community policing is meant to achieve, which is building trusting, lasting, whole community engagements. I want to specifically call out the thank you for the CPAB reorganization that went through. I know that there was, in this last year, there's been some consternation about how people would they still have a seat at the table, and would they still have a voice in the process. And I believe that everyone that wants to have a voice still has that voice today, but it's in a process, I think, that holds the board much more accountable, that they're engaging and that they're contributing to the overall safety of the city. To juvenile diversion, Sentinella has been our charter member, has been a real leader and a partner with us. I will say, just for a matter for the record and clarification, the department receives no money for juvenile justice per se, in the sense of diversion or otherwise, but we certainly will join with you. And I hear clearly the need to join more clearly with support of Sentinella and other community-based organizations that are providing diversion services. I'm proud of our relationship with LA Unified School District. I believe the shift that they have made in the last 5 years to ensuring that statutory offenses and matters of school discipline and activities both on and off campus are handled administratively in place of law enforcement and the more earlier traditional processes of engaging us for matters like daytime curfew and so forth. I'm encouraged by their more enlightened thinking and working with us so that when we see instances of law enforcement involvement with juveniles, we're protecting them rather than making arrests. I think the one last area here is that juvenile justice, which we've seen such tremendous reduction in juvenile-related crime in this last decade, has occurred during this reform. And so the counterintuitive nature of some suggestions, I think, is something we've always got to lean into. The last matter, I believe, for juvenile justice for us is two aspects. One is the restorative nature of it. And I will say that the quality diversion is what law enforcement seeks to continue to ensure. And at times in this process, across not in our relationship, but in other relationships with other providers in the juvenile justice arena, sometimes the quality of that interaction and engagement to ensure a restorative aspect of that relationship leaves the victim or community members feeling shortchanged. And I think that is an area that certainly for us, we want to promote the narrative that you've talked about in your story and example. Lastly, gun violence. I think that this is an area that while we have stretched and certainly moved and expanded the number of offenses that young people are that this process has a true avenue to avoid criminalizing and so forth. The gun violence area is one that leaves us a lasting concern. So there is a waterline of offenses that to the members of the entire community, we recognize in juvenile justice there are certain instances in which, and I'll say to our close partners in probation and other parts of the criminal justice system who may argue or debate some points here, that I do think that their involvement in those instances plays a significant role. But I thank you both for being here and your continued partnership with us.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you both. Thank you very much. And while I'm especially grateful to all members of the community who came today, I'm especially grateful to those who have waited throughout the meeting today to be heard on what is our last but not least panel. Detective and Ms. Sinya and Ms. Bustos, if you could come forward. And with our great appreciation, gratitude for waiting, this commission has long stated it wanted to hear from members of the community who deal with violence against women in the community. It is an issue this commission has long been very concerned about, and we know the department has as well, but we'd like to hear from your perspective. Detective, are you starting us off?
Yes.
Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Marie Sadnaga. I am the Domestic Violence Coordinator for the department. So I, along with my partner, really oversee the department's response to domestic violence. That includes officers responding to the radio calls, people coming into the front desk, detectives doing their investigations. And two of our big programs that we oversee are the Domestic Abuse Response Team, or DART, thanks to the mayor's office, is going into its 5th year of being one team at all 21 geographic areas, and our 2 family justice centers, one in Valley Bureau and one in Central Bureau. And in a few minutes, Ms. Bustos is going to talk to you about those programs. A few other things I do is just ensuring that our policy and procedures reflect current law, and that we're continuously assessing how we respond to domestic violence. You know, we always look for ways to make it more efficient and to provide better services to our victims. That includes working with training division to make sure the curriculum there matches our procedures, and also organizing an annual training for our DART officers, advocates, and detectives to just update them on current issues and let them go back and be able to train the other officers at their divisions. And lastly, I and my partner are really the liaison for the department, not only with other fellow officers to ask us questions, but with our counterparts in the mayor's office, city attorney, district attorney, our service providers, the 6 that we've partnered with to create DART, and also all other agencies within the domestic violence community, just so that we can all work together and create a holistic approach to victim services. And now I will pass it on to Ms. Bustos, who's a supervisor from Casa de la Familia. She'll talk about DART and the Family Justice Center. And then Ms. Sinha, who is a managing attorney at Peace Over Violence, who will be discussing their legal advocacy project.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting us to speak today. My name is Paloma Bustos, as was mentioned. I work for an agency called Casa de la Familia, or CDLF Counseling, if you want to say it in English. We are a nonprofit organization, and we provide services to those impacted by trauma, including domestic violence, sexual assault, for instance. Our agency currently partners with 5 divisions of the LAPD as part of the Domestic Abuse Response Team, which was developed by the City of Los Angeles to break that cycle of violence that most of our victims experience in abusive relationships. And as most of you here know, intimate partner violence is different than other crimes. The perpetrator is an intimate partner. The crime often occurs in the home where one or both of them live together. It also happens in a cycle, basically. There are also multiple interdependencies. Financial resources are shared. The housing, children are involved. There's also social networks, which makes it extremely difficult for victims of domestic violence to leave abusive relationships. There's also those victims that we come in contact who are in fear of police or who are in fear of reporting to police. Maybe because the perpetrator told them, if you call police, we're both gonna get arrested, or if you call police, we're both gonna get deported. For this reason, the LAPD partners with domestic violence agencies to provide, to be able to respond to the scene and provide those immediate crisis intervention when the 911 call comes in initially. And DART is based on best practices that says that intervention is most effective when we meet with the person immediately after an incident has happened. Because we have that window of opportunity to be able to talk to the victim, and hopefully the victim at that point is receptive to our services. For instance, just last week, we met with a survivor who was very hesitant about leaving the relationship. She was very hesitant about leaving the house that she shared with her partner and her 2 children. But when their children saw a gun sitting just on the couch, just laying there, I think once we talked to her and made her understand like the seriousness of like having a gun in the house and the threat to her safety and her children, we were able to go with her to court the next day, and we were able to help her apply for a restraining order. And we were also able to remove her from the home safely without actually knowledge to with the perpetrator. So we were able to remove her while the perpetrator was at work, and we provided a civil standby, and we removed her and took her to a place where it's safe for her to be with her and her children. These are situations like, for instance, we try to prevent situations like in San Diego that just happened recently, with a father killed his wife and her 3 children and their 3 children. And so situations like that, when we spoke with the victim again, she was very hesitant, but once we interacted with her, she accepted our services and she was able to leave. There's also victims that minimize the significant risk of strangulation, and so they might just say, well, he just choked me, or, you know, but at that moment they may not understand like the medical effects that it may have even after the strangulation has occurred. So together with the DART officer and the victim advocate, we're able to provide that safety planning. We're able to go to court with them and support them at different hearings, not just criminal court, but also when they're going to civil court and applying for the restraining order. Or we've even been in children's court where social services gets involved, and we've been able to sit next to them and support them. We may not be able to speak for them when they're in front of the judge, but we are able, we often get told by them that just having that feeling of support next to them is just enough for them to give them that power to speak up and finally break that silence. I mean, I recall just sitting in the courtroom with one of our victims, and the judge asked her, why did you decide to come forward now? And so she answered that, she looked at me and she said, because I'm getting help, because somebody finally heard me and talked to me about breaking that silence and saying what happened to me during that relationship that I experienced, the abuse. And as Detective Sandinaga mentioned, this program expanded in 2015 from 10 divisions to 21, to all the 21 divisions that we have here in Los Angeles. So with that said, it says that this is no longer an option. This is a requirement. So I think that one of the things that has made it, at least with the divisions that we partner with, is that support from command staff. So if anything, that's one of my recommendations as a commission, is to really emphasize this program to all command staff, from captains to lieutenants to police officers, that to trickle down to police officers, that this program is very important, you know, because we're all in a partnership. And I think one of the successes of this program in working in partnership with a DART officer is that we learn from each other. We learn about what they experience when they're responding to the scene, and we also, and they learn from us in terms of how to identify techniques that better serve in assisting survivors of domestic violence. The other part of the domestic abuse response team is we have to provide roll call training. So in partnership with the DART officer that we work with twice a week, as required in our contract, we are required to go in front of officers that we work with and bring up different issues that we might notice when responding to the scene, not in a way of criticizing anybody, but as a way of maybe identifying different ways in speaking to the survivors. So instead of asking, why did you stay or why don't you leave, maybe asking what kept you from leaving and addressing those concerns in order to better assist the person to leave that situation. One of the things that, where I mentioned the support from command staff is really important. For instance, in 3 out of the 5 divisions that we partner, we're able to provide a support group at the station for domestic violence survivors. And you don't often hear that, right? We don't really hear a police station having a support group right there at the station. But I think that goes to say that it builds trust in the relationship with police officers that the victims have with the police department. And so for the command staff to be able to allow us that space every week to be able to sit with the survivors and talk to them about their experiences. And as a program supervisor and as a advocate myself, I have been able to respond to the scene and be able to see that that growth and that evolution from where a victim goes from being a victim, identify as a victim, to being a survivor. So I do get to see those experiences and those changes that maybe police officers who are responding to the scene may not see all the time, you know what I mean? So that support is so important at the police departments from all levels, I think. And in terms of like the Family Justice Center, as Detective Saranaga mentioned, just in January 2018, the city of Los Angeles opened its second Family Justice Center, located within the LAC USC Medical Center in the Boyle Heights area. And it follows the structure that many family justice centers throughout the country are doing, where it seeks to be a one-stop shop, meaning that survivors can come in, survivors, not only survivors of domestic violence, but survivors of sexual assault, elder abuse, and survivors of child abuse can come in there and receive all the services that they need in a single place. For instance, we have at the Family Justice Center, we have the LAPD, who has their detectives and officers there investigating and following up on cases. We also have the LA County Bar Association, which helps domestic violence survivors complete the orders for protection. And they also prepare them to court. So every week they have a workshop where survivors who want to understand the process of the courtroom, just sitting here, me feeling nervous, just talking to all of you, but with survivors going into court for the first time and not knowing exactly what to expect. There's a different language that's spoken in the courtroom, lingo language that they're not used to hearing. So just that expectation, they prepare them from court during those workshops. We also have representatives from the city attorney's office who are there to provide assistance with completing the applications for the victim compensation program so that they can cover the cost of therapy and relocation if that's necessary. We also have advocates from community organizations that are there to provide those additional support services that the survivors needs, like referrals to individual counseling, referrals to support groups, and they're there at that Family Justice Center as well. And just recently, the mayor's office commissioned Casa de la Familia to have a therapist there at the Family Justice Center. So all those services are being provided just there at that, in a single space for that person to feel safe, come in and addresses most of their needs. So thank you so much for hearing. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners and President. My name is Payal Sinha. I'm the Managing Attorney at Legal Advocacy Project at Peace Over Violence. We provide very similar services as Ms. Bustos mentioned. Peace Over Violence is a nonprofit organization established since 1971, dedicated to building healthy relationships, families, and communities free from sexual assault, domestic violence, and stalking. We believe that violence takes many forms and exists on many levels of society, and that is why we have adopted several approaches to address those issues through education, prevention, and intervention. We provide holistic services to the victims of crime. We provide emergency services through our 24-hour rape and battering hotline, where we provide emotional support, information, compassion, accompaniment, referrals, and advocacy services to these survivors. We answer their basic questions. We provide crisis intervention so that to make sure that they're okay on the phone and can take the next steps. Like Ms. Busters mentioned, we also have a DART team, and we collaborate with 4 units with LAPD. We provide very similar services. As she mentioned, we provide crisis counseling, emotional support, advocacy information about their rights and options, assistance with restraining order paperwork, shelter placement, and resources for survivors. We also have a similar thing called SART, a sexual assault response team, which is based off in hospitals. We partner with 2 hospitals, and we roll out on a roll calls. If there is a sexual assault reported, we provide assistance there. We are there to answer any questions that a survivor may have, to let the survivor know that if they have a right to file a police report, or they can not provide any kind of answers if they don't feel like. We are there just so that we could hear out the survivor, to make sure that they are safe, they have support, and just so that we can explain them what a SART exam could look like, because it has to do with their dignity, it has to do with their safety, right? We are just there to hold their hands, to make sure they understand that at least we are there and we believe them. We provide various intervention services. We provide comprehensive case management services at Peace Over Violence that, again, combined with what other services we provide. We help them navigate social services. We provide personal, legal, and criminal justice accompaniments in order for them to receive justice, protection, and compassion and healing. We have a legal advocacy project which is established in 2005. We provide an array of free comprehensive legal services that includes immigration services, help with filing victim compensation, safe at home applications. We also assist with family law legal services, divorce, paternity, child custody, and we also provide assistance with restraining orders. All of the services are free. We do full scope immigration services, including U visas, VAWA, adjustment of status, so far DACA, and so on and so forth, depending on what they qualify for. We at Peace Over Violence provide counseling services that includes individual counseling services so that they can have a long-term impact on their trauma and they can work better with time. We do provide group counseling services, and we have a lot of support groups and group counseling services. So we have domestic violence support group, sexual assault support group. We also have healing art groups, and we have a trauma-informed yoga as well at the agency. All of these services are provided free of cost. We have a prevention department that works with youth because we believe that young people are active members in the movement to end domestic violence. We host Summer Leadership Institute every year, where we prepare youth to make powerful social change by providing them more training in what a healthy relationship looks like, and what a cycle of violence, and educate them throughout so that they can be the change that we want them to be. They can participate on schools, on campuses, and have a stop club there. We collaborate with other schools and colleges to maintain our presence in the community and assist students and educate them about healthy relationships. We also have empowerment self-defense classes, which is a combination of awareness, assertiveness, and verbal confrontation skills combined with safety strategies and physical techniques. We have a training department as well, where we develop curriculum based on what is requested from us, basic understanding of what an interpersonal violence looks like, and myth around interpersonal violence, and supporting services that are available in the community. Also, basic understanding of victim rights and an understanding of what a judicial system looks like. Thank you.
Thank you both, and thank you for the incredibly important work that both of your organizations do, and certainly the other organizations that work with you in the community on this. I'd appreciate it if both of you could address a little more about your relationship with the LAPD, And certainly you presented one recommendation about command staff either being more engaged or really advocating for these programs. But I'm interested in how do we get better? How does the city get better? How does LAPD get better in assisting community-based organizations in addressing violence against women? And I welcome any ideas, suggestions you have, but if also you can talk about the nature of your relationship with LAPD, that'd be helpful for us.
Well, one of the things that I personally have been doing, for instance, with the officer that I work with, one of the things that I have been doing with him is I take him with me to presentations in the community. And I also make him part of the roll call trainings. Although it might not be exactly a requirement for them to go up there with me and provide those presentations, just making them a part of that relationship so that when we're going out to do presentation, he's able to explain his role and what he's doing with survivors and what we're doing with our side and how we partner together so that the community understands, because one of the things with the DART officers, they're not just primarily there to enforce us as a person that's enforcing laws, but they're identifying and communicating and spending time with the victims when we're responding to the scene. One of the differences is patrol officers are responding to the scene and they take the police report, and then we arrive to the scene and we're able to engage with that person, not just for 1 hour. Sometimes I know we've been there for like 1 hour, 2 hours, just focusing on that person and that person's needs. So that's one of the things that I've been doing specifically with the officer that I work with. Another thing that I've been doing with him is, or with the officers that I partner with, I invite them to come to my domestic violence class. I invite them to come and talk to the survivors, because not oftentimes, like I mentioned earlier, officers don't always get to see that end point, right? They only see the very beginning where they are taking the police report, and maybe the victim stopped cooperating with police or doesn't want to follow through with the investigation. But when I invite them to the group, they're able to see those faces again, and they're able to see that the progress that that person has made since we responded to the scene. So when I talk about really just that emphasis from command staff as one of the things, what was happening in the beginning when the program was first started, I recall that I remember one of our divisions wasn't really making the DART officer available to respond to the scene. Instead, they were putting him to work patrol, which prevented us from really responding to those domestic violence calls. But once that command staff really saw the importance of having that that officer available to respond to the scene, that we were able to not have that officer respond to other calls for service, but instead just focus on the DART program. So when I talk about support from command staff, I talk about all those little details, right? Having a DART officer available, and that comes from command staff because they believed that this was important for them to have at the stations. And being able to include them in the process, like I said, really work in a partnership together, and so that we're both going out to the community and talking to the community members, and so that they're able to have that trust in the police officers, because that's where we can begin to stop the violence, the cycle of violence. And the other thing that I know would really help our DART officers specifically, it would be having vehicles that are equipped with computers. Because one of the things that I know that's asking for a lot, but we ride in an unmarked vehicle, so we're not riding patrol cars. We're riding an unmarked vehicle just for the safety of our advocates, and so that we're not flagged down by everybody. But we don't always have that computer that tells us the comments of the call, or if there's warrants, or if there's other impertinent information that might be relevant for us when we're responding to the scene and we're addressing the needs of the survivor.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think Ms. Bustos covered a lot of points that I was going to share. But one of the things that we do at Peace Over Violence is SART and DART collaborative meetings, where we invite these officers to come and, hear some of the things that we have been facing challenge with. it's one of the things is like interviewing techniques, right? And we understand that they are at their moment, interviewing a survivor because they want to get the first information possible and make sure everything is lined up. We really appreciate the fact that they do show up. Their schedule is busy, but we also want to make sure that that continues more and more, because that's really important for us, because we bring in more questions from the community, more concerns from the community, right? Be it an immigration concern, because right now with whatever is happening, the community is panicking, right? We want to make sure that we become the bridge, right, to build whatever the gap is, that we want to become the bridge, right? We want to make sure that we are understanding officers' concern and we are understanding what their process looks like, so that we can make sure when we do our outreach and education with the community that they are understanding that. So that one of the biggest thing that I wanted to say is that we would like to see more collaboration, and we want to see more showing up in these community meetings. That would be really, really helpful.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions that you'd like to ask? Chief, comments?
Good afternoon, and I'm encouraged by Mayor Garcetti's his full-throated support, him and the First Lady, and the expansion of DART so that we are in 21 areas. I think our next growth spate is, how do we make this 7 days a week? And so as we're identifying stretch goals with equipping officers with MDCs and their plane cars, how do we have this even more present so that 7 days a week we have a presence of a professional volunteer with a properly trained officer. And we will work with, again, our coordinator. Detective, thank you for being here and your leadership on behalf of the entire city of LAPD in regards to our efforts with family violence, whether it be sexual assaults or victims of domestic violence or other trauma. And then lastly, Family Justice Center. The question I'll ask is, where is the third one? So that we continue to look at the growth of this area. Domestic violence is still too embarrassing of an ugly scar in the American society, and these strategies go to reduce it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you both, and thank you very much for waiting. Madam Secretary, are there public comment cards for individuals in the room?
We have none.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adjourn? All in favor? Aye. We now stand adjourned until next week. Thank you very much.